This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10, and it is to the benighted territory of the Middle East that we return this morning, perhaps inevitably after the extraordinary intervention of the Foreign Secretary David Lammy earlier this week. Perhaps not extraordinary. Some would say overdue. Some would perhaps fail to understand the difference between being in power and being in opposition, and the often futile nature of symbolic gestures. Whether or not this turns out to be more substantive or more meaningful, only time will tell. But it has as much to do with the domestic political situation in Israel as it does with the sort of expiry of international patience, because the game is changing there very much in the moment. It does leave us in the strange position of, and not for the first time on this programme, of having explained in some detail why what is happening now would happen, even as many people lobbed all sorts of insults and abuse at those of us who could see absolutely clearly that the notion of international support and indeed domestic support for Benjamin Netanyahu's campaign of, murdering babies, to quote a very interesting figure, who I will tell you about shortly, could only really have one ending in the context of international public discourse. What the ending will be in the context of the people on the ground, the ones still alive, I do not know. You do not know. Nobody knows. It is obvious that the Hamas attack upon Israel on October the 7th, 2023 was unconscionable, egregious, hideous, horrible. But so are many of the things that have happened since, visited upon the people of Gaza by the Israeli government. And I think the problem this morning is that the forces against which the world is now turning do not seem capable of reflection or change. How much of that is down to the internal arithmetic of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, in other words, the coalition he needs to sustain to retain power and quite possibly to retain his own personal liberty, and how much is down to dreams of a greater Israel or ideological commitment to various, relatively hideous ideas of the future, again, we do not know. But I want, before we turn to David Lammy, I want first to tell you about an Israeli politician, not currently a member of the Knesset, but essentially the de facto leader of the opposition, the head of Israel's Labour Party. He is called Yair Golan, and he said yesterday the war began as a strong and determined reaction to Hamas's heinous attack. But I'm going to warn you in advance that if I said this without attributing to it, my inbox would fill up with accusations of anti-Semitism and sympathies for Hamas. But this is the leader of a major political party in Israel speaking, just as Kenneth Roth, former head of Human Rights Watch, is the Jewish son of a Holocaust survivor and the one who explained to me in the clearest terms why he prefers to use the word genocide now to describe what has happened in Israel. The war began as a strong and determined reaction to Hamas's heinous attack. Actually, no, I've got another aside for you. You think about how obvious everything I'm about to tell you is, and then you just reflect for a moment upon the effort that has been put into trying to keep voices like this silent. The effort that has been put into trying to cancel, insult, abuse, malign, libel, slander anybody suggesting that Israel had reached a point of indefensible conduct some time ago. Not in the immediate aftermath of the October attacks, of course, but at some point afterwards. So this is Yair Golan, the head of Israeli Labour. The war began as a strong and determined reaction to Hamas's heinous attack. But what started as a just operation to defend Israel's security and release the hostages has morphed under the direction of this failed government into a purposeless and senseless war. It has nothing to do with the release of the hostages, as they could already be released through a ceasefire agreement. That's not an opinion, by the way, that's counting. Nor with defeating Hamas, as Hamas could have been defeated long ago through diplomatic action, creating a moderate Sunni alternative through a regional coalition. This project would strengthen Israel's security far better than anything we see now. We have been silent and appeased the ultra-right extremists for too long, and as a result we lost our spine and reached this unprecedented crisis. We cannot be timid or silent when ministers in this government openly celebrate death and starvation. Our mission is to protect Israel's character, to ensure it is a country that doesn't kill children as a hobby or as a policy. As you can imagine, there was a pretty strong reaction to his words. A lot of people choosing, as is normal in these circumstances, to pick up on his use of the word hobby, to attack him for that, to play the game of semantics rather than the moral heft of what he is saying. He goes on, a government that states it is acceptable to starve and kill children is a government that sounds like a spokesperson of Hamas. And it's not just governments, of course. I have spoken to people, let alone read out messages from people who are also entirely comfortable with the idea that it is acceptable to starve and kill children. You may have heard some yourself on LBC, not just on this programme, but on pretty much all of them. They're a little reluctant to go there, but it becomes pretty clear that there's nowhere left to go if they're correctly questioned, which of course is not always the case. A government that talks about dropping nuclear bombs on Gaza is not a Jewish government, certainly not a Zionist one. A government that some of its members refer to October the 7th as a miracle because it supports their wider occupation fantasies is a government that despises the people of Israel. A government that led with the policy of Hamas is an asset prior to October the 7th, that doesn't prioritise the lives of the hostages, is a government that doesn't serve the Israeli people but works for Qatar. And that is where we are now, in Israel itself. And I wanted to start with that, lest anybody was thinking of making the usual hackneyed, tired and increasingly offensive points about any criticism of what Benjamin Netanyahu's government has done being evidence of anything other than profound humanitarian concern. Because do you know what has annoyed people from the very start? Do you know what has annoyed precisely the people that man is talking about, precisely the people that are reluctant to admit that they're comfortable or they think it is acceptable for children to be killed, precisely the people that Yair Golan addresses there. They can't accept the idea that the death of a Jewish child is just as heartbreaking and just as wrong, morally, legally, ethically, as the death of a Palestinian or the death of an Arab child. And the idea that that can be offensive to anybody, the idea that that can be an invitation to unload abuse and insult is absolutely shocking. And I would say particularly perhaps for residents of a country or supporters of a country that was in many ways envisioned as a refuge from precisely that worldview. The idea of a human hierarchy, the idea of a human life being worth more or less than another, entirely as a consequence of an accident of birth. But we are where we are. And I wanted to begin with that because it is the words of a senior Israeli politician, echoed by many Israelis and many people who hold the importance of the existence of the modern state of Israel, as I do, but I'm not Jewish, so I don't have a cat in the fight, as it were, but on a personal level. Many people who are passionate, tireless supporters of the modern state of Israel will be agreeing with what Yair Golan has said there. And now I'll turn you to what David Lammy has done, speaking in the House of Commons. It felt almost as if a bottle had been uncorked, as if a dam had broken, and we may turn our attention shortly to the question of why now, but first you need to hear what he had to say.
Nearly all the hostages have been freed through negotiations, not military force. And that is why hostage families themselves and many other Israelis oppose this plan so strongly. Nor will this plan eliminate Hamas or make Israel secure. This war has left a generation orphaned and traumatized, ready for Hamas to recruit. As we learned in Northern Ireland, to defeat terrorists and their warped ideology, you cannot just rely on military might. You have to offer a viable political alternative, opposing the expansion of the war that's killed thousands of children is not rewarding Hamas.
Although you will, of course, be accused of it, Mr. Lammy. One senses that he has decided he can live with that because, of course, some of the key characters in Netanyahu's administration are pretty hideous in their comments and their outlooks.
Netanyahu's government is planning to drive Gazans from their homes into a corner of the Strip to the south and permit them a fraction of the aid that they need. Yesterday, Minister Smodrick even spoke of Israeli forces cleansing Gaza. Destroying what's left of residents, Palestinians, being relocated, he said, to third countries. We must call this what it is. It is extremism. It is dangerous. It is repellent. It is monstrous, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
And then the comment that I think will inform the question I will ask you. In fact, I should occasionally at least bend half a knee to the notion of this being a traditional phone-in programme and give you a quick heads up about what that question will be. How on earth did it come to this? From any perspective, but particularly from an Israeli perspective, how could any government go from having the sympathy and support of practically the entire world, even administrations and individuals that have historic problems with much of the conduct of the sort of Likud-flavoured element of Israeli society, the attack upon celebrating young people, the attack upon a music festival, the utterly bloody, murderous attack on October the 7th. How could anybody have gone from that place of almost unprecedented sympathy and support to international pariah? That will be my question. How did Benjamin Netanyahu end up leading not just Israel, but also many, many, many people, both there and sadly here, into the place so perfectly described by our Foreign Secretary?
Our message is clear. There is a UN plan ready to deliver aid at scale, needed with mitigations against aid diversion. There are brave humanitarians ready to do their jobs. There are over 9,000 trucks at the border. Prime Minister Netanyahu, end this blockade now and let the aid in. Regrettably, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite our efforts, this Israeli government's egregious actions and rhetoric have continued. They are isolating Israel from its friends and partners around the world, undermining the interests of the Israeli people, and damaging the image of the State of Israel in the eyes of the world. I find this deeply painful as a lifelong friend of Israel and a believer in the values that were expressed in its Declaration of Independence. As the Prime Minister and fellow leaders said yesterday, we cannot stand by in the face of this new deterioration.
10:17 is the time. We will wait to see what they do, but already trade talks have been abandoned and sanctions are being talked about, including for some of the key members of both the administration and the hideous illegal settlement movement that doesn't receive anything like the levels of criticism from UK media that it should do. Haaretz, which is a kind of liberal media outlet in Israel itself, has published an editorial under the title "The Uncomfortable Truth. Yair Golan is right about what Israel is becoming." And he is, and so is David Lammy. Already you will have Golan himself, the Israeli Jewish politician, being accused of anti-Semitism by members of Netanyahu's busted flush of a government. One former minister warning that he will, quote, certainly add fuel to the fire of anti-Semitism, trying once again to conflate criticism of murdering children with somehow historic hatred of Jews, something that happens on a scale that is almost unbelievable. given the popularity, if you prefer, of the position. The Defence Minister has accused Golan himself of a vile blood libel. So perhaps I was being a bit optimistic when I said that citing the interventions of a Jewish Israeli politician would somehow defuse the ludicrous accusations of anti-Semitism and vile blood libel that often accompany criticisms of starving an entire nation or murdering children. They have called for him to be ostracised from public life. So, I mean, anybody who considers themselves to be anti-woke is going to be furious about that call for cancellation and cessation of freedom of speech. And one minister, someone called Shlomo Karhi, who you may not have come across so far, called the lawmaker a terrorist. Justice Minister Yariv Levin, the architect of the government coup, according to Haaretz, called for him to be stripped of his rank of Major General because he is not only a politician, he's also a patriot and a military hero. So I don't think this is a question with obvious answers, partly because we've never pinpointed precisely where the pivot took place. Remember that question that we happened upon together very early and I never really got away from again, which was how much will be too much? How much will be too much? How much response will be too much response? What will be disproportionate? How many deaths will be too many deaths as retaliation or revenge for the attacks of October the 7th? And I still don't know when that point was reached, but goodness me, it's been crossed now. So how did Israel manage to go from a place of unprecedented international public sympathy to uncontested international pariah status, starving children, and as Yair Golan has pointed out quite powerfully, starving children and celebrating it? How has that managed to happen? It's 21 minutes after 10. The number you need is 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10, and the question is a simple one. How did it come to this? Yeah, Golan speaking in Israel, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, speaking in the British Parliament, describing, well, perhaps part of the answer is the fact that describing things that have been unfolding, but not in plain sight, oddly. I mean, some footage gets out, some reportage gets out, some heartbreaking images get out, but Israel has very successfully prevented freedom of press, one of the great platforms of democracy, very, very successfully prevented journalists who've been desperate to get into Gaza from getting there and reporting on what is going on, which means anything that does come out of Gaza. And I think personally, and it may be that because I work in the media, I'm over-egging this particular pudding, but if you're going to say that, then you'd have to explain to me why Israel has put so much effort into preventing or removing a free media. It means, in the first case, that you can poo-poo everything that comes out as either propaganda or fake news. And in fact, if you reflect upon it, this is something that was happening long before Donald Trump even coined the phrase. Every single statistic that comes out is not to be trusted because Hamas retain control of the Gaza Strip. So could we send in some people who can be trusted? No. Well, all right. Can I take my numbers from the United Nations? Biased, anti-Semitic from the Red Cross, the Red Crescent. Biased, anti-Semitic. Where can I get my information from? You can take it from us, or you can take it from nobody. Extraordinary how many people in this country who call themselves journalists have been supremely comfortable over many years, long before the October the 7th attacks, with the idea of a government which is often described as the only democracy in the Middle East, not just abolishing freedom of press, but actually promoting propaganda as the only acceptable version of contested events. Even Louis Theroux couldn't get into Gaza, of course. He went into the West Bank for his recent film about the settlers, called The Settlers, and inevitably one of the activists who spoke to him subsequently had his home raided, probably in revenge for appearing in the documentary. There is your free media. There is your great democracy. Laura asks how many Palestinian journalists have been killed. She uses the word murdered. I won't sanitize that by Israel, James. I used to have the number at my fingertips. I haven't checked for a while, Laura. I apologize. But the question of how it's come to this is one that I invite you now to answer. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. Sean's in Seaford. Sean, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I'd like to say it's come this far because I think, unfortunately, we're just a bit spineless and cowardly. Listening to David Lammy yesterday, it was just made me so angry. It's just hollow condemnation and... Well,
respectfully, mate, you can't really say that without... unless you don't even have a cursory understanding of how international relations work. David Lammy will now be accused by a world leader who is an ally of this country of being anti-Semitic or of being the supporter of a terrorist. It was an extraordinary intervention. But of course, if he was a backbench MP with no power whatsoever, he could have been saying this for years. The point is he's the Foreign Secretary and he's telling our ally to stop killing children, to stop starving children. The idea that makes him spineless. You might wish it had happened earlier, but I promise you, even a GCSE in politics would tell you what a significant intervention that is. Well,
it's not really intervention because he's just saying what he's been told to say, and he was
right. By whom?
By the Labour Friends for Israel and the...
So you think Labour Friends for Israel told David Lammy to describe the starving of an entire nation?
Well, no, he's just being told, oh, it's dreadful, go up and tell the British...
being told by who?
Well, by the people who... by the people in the government.
Oh, I've got no idea. He is the Foreign Secretary. He's the head of the Foreign Office. So you think he's been handed a script that he doesn't agree with? I want to know who you think handed him the script.
Well, it could be anyone. It could be the Israeli ambassador.
So you think the Israeli ambassador asked David Lammy to stand up in the House of Commons and attack the Israeli government, accuse them of starving a nation, focus on Smotrich's words about cleansing, and describe them as entirely isolated on the world stage. Just run me through why the Israeli ambassador would want David Lammy to do that, mate.
Well, because he's done nothing since the war has started.
No, why would the Israeli ambassador want David Lammy to describe Israel in such hideous terms?
Well, because it's just lip service. They want him to say... No.
Why would the Israeli ambassador want Israel to be isolated and attacked by the British Foreign Secretary?
They haven't been isolated or attacked. It's just hollow words, and then the war's going to carry on.
Let's listen to this again, shall we?
Our message is clear. There is a UN plan ready to deliver aid at scale, needed with mitigations against aid diversion. There are brave humanitarians ready to do their jobs. There are over 9,000 trucks at the border. Prime Minister Netanyahu, end this blockade now and let the aid in. Regrettably, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite our efforts, this Israeli government's egregious actions and rhetoric have continued. They are isolating Israel from its friends and partners around the world, undermining the interests of the Israeli people, and damaging the image of the State of Israel in the eyes of the world. I find this deeply painful as a lifelong friend of Israel and a believer in the values that were expressed in its Declaration of Independence. As the Prime Minister and fellow leaders said yesterday, we cannot stand by in the face of this new deterioration.
So just in a sentence or two, if you would, Sean, why would the Jewish Friends of Israel or the Israeli ambassador be instructing David Lammy to say that?
Well, maybe not them specifically, but
who then?
He came across like just a terrible. He just came across like a terrible act. If you could let me finish.
No, I won't, because you're not answering my question. Who told him to say it?
Well, it could be many people. It could be...
Well, you said it was the Israeli ambassador, and then you said it was the Jewish Friends of Israel. Who else is on your little list?
It could be anyone. He's a bad actor.
Well, who else is on your list?
That was the most spineless speech I've ever heard in my life.
Why you should listen back to this call, Sean. It's 10:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:32 is the time. I'm conscious of occasionally repeating myself, but apparently sometimes it's more necessary than even I realise. The question we're asking today is, how has Israel been led, or how has Benjamin Netanyahu managed to lead Israel into a position of international pariah status, even as many people have been pointing out for well over a year that this destination was inevitable without a change of either direction or driver. So how has this happened? And there will be many answers to this question. It may be that one of them rises above all others, but if it is set to do so, I can't currently see what it is. But hopefully for the final time, for at least half an hour, the question is, how has Israel managed to end up in this position? Not, I think that the Israeli ambassador wrote David Lammy's speech. 10:33 is the time. Mark's in Bristol. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning. Just before I start, I just need to set out that I am a British citizen, Israeli citizen, served in the army in Israel, moved there, was born here, came back, have been deeply involved in the political situation there, and co-founded the first Palestinian-Israeli band in the world with 4 guys from Gaza in 1998. And I say all that just so people have a sense that I do know a little bit about what I'm talking about.
Are you daring to contrast yourself with my previous caller, Mark?
No, actually, I was on hold and I missed what he said at the time. I didn't understand, though, how the Israeli ambassador wrote his speech.
To be fair to Sean, nor did he. Anyway, I don't know. I'm wary of asking you the name of your band in case you're not very good. But that's not the point of this call.
We were great, but the reason I'm not going to say it is that some of them are still stuck in Gaza, and I don't want them to be held up, and hung out to dry.
So what's happened? What's happened to Netanyahu's Israel?
Netanyahu's Israel has been in the works for the last 25 years. This is not new. All we're seeing is a culmination of events that gave them the opportunity to put into practice something that they've been pushing for many years in a kind of subterfuge, or whatever the word would be. I can't think of the right word. But money and influence has been pouring into the right-wing extremists and specifically religious extremist parties for many years now. Similar in a way to actually what's been driving, fundamentalism across the world. And we have been waiting, they have been waiting now 20 years to have an opportunity to be in power, have the power to settle legally the West Bank, push back against, anybody who talks about a two-state solution or the potential of having any kind of peaceful outcome with the Palestinians. I mean, Netanyahu has categorically in his party said that they are a party who will never make peace with the Palestinians. So I'm not really quite sure why everybody is so surprised at what's going on.
Well, pause there, if you would, because I don't believe you. I don't think you are really confused. I don't know whether you're being sarcastic or whether are you being sincere? I don't want to be rude.
No, you're not being rude, and I'm happy to clarify. What are you asking me specifically?
Well, it's because of a massive failure of reporting in this country and arguably in Israel as well. Most people, even who ring me to support what Netanyahu has done, and they haven't, to be fair, nobody's done that for a while, although I still get the odd texts, won't know about the comments about never making peace with Palestine, won't know about some of the things that Max Hastings reported years ago that Benjamin Netanyahu said to him when Hastings, I think, was writing about his brother. They won't know about some of the stated ambitions of people like Smotrich or Shlomo Karhi. So when you say, I don't know why people are unaware of this, I say, well,
okay, good point.
Because no one's telling them.
Okay, I accept that.
Okay.
Listen, absolutely. No, I wasn't being sarcastic.
Okay, I'm just checking.
No, it's fine. The bottom line is it's in their manifesto.
Well, I know.
So, I mean, any decent reporting, but to quote you, not quote, but to feed off of you, that's not something we see very often.
No.
So what I'm saying is this is not a hidden agenda. It's like deception in plain sight, if such an expression exists. And we're seeing it across the world. The rise of neoliberalism feeds into this. He is himself a neoliberal, Netanyahu, and that's been going on for 70 years, and nobody's kind of really acknowledged it. So what I'm trying to say is really simple. There's something about Israel. I don't know if this answers your question, but there is an issue about Israel that many people do not know, which I think is really, really important that many people should know. Israel is a country that lives in fear for obvious reasons. And there's a lot of legitimacy for that. Israel is also a country that's governments from the beginning of time, from both left and right, have exploited the victim mentality in order to, what's the word to be, to like get that fear even more embedded in the population through mild propaganda and education over the years, that we are the victims and nobody loves us and we will always be hated.
Well, two things can be true at the same time. Yeah. The threat is epic and constant and real, but your analysis of the victimhood mentality could also be true at the same time. You're not offering up an either or by any stretch of the imagination.
Absolutely. To use your sentence, we can hold two ideas in our head at the same time, and many more. I accept that absolutely. I'm not trying to defend or attack anything here. I'm saying there is a word in Hebrew, bitchonist. Bitchonist comes from the word in Hebrew, bitachon, security. That means people who are socialist-minded people will vote right because they believe that the right is stronger when it comes to defense. So you have actually a large leaning socialist, mentally kind of very open-minded population, actually, who fear drives them to vote right, and it's a knee-jerk reaction. So we have, and a blindness, and I think the most important thing is that it's really, really hard for those living in Israel. It's extraordinary. Let me rephrase this. It is extraordinary how many Israelis are actually do want a peaceful solution and are quite liberal and open and caring people, deeply actually, but live in a fear and a sense of insular kind of, well, especially now over the last 2 years, consider themselves totally hated by the world, to use not a great word, you know. And so they're pushing back into that space, that knee-jerk reaction. Well, everybody hates me, so but ... you all the rest, and we're just going to hang in here and carry on. And they are being led by a bunch of people who have a totally different agenda, who have exploited these people and keep them in a state of fear. And we have a vicious circle. But all of that is relevant and interesting. But to answer your question, the bottom line is that this is a plan in the making, with a dream from some people of a greater Israel, a dream of some people of more power, I don't even know why. They're off their nuts, in my opinion, but that's something else altogether. Because it's not going to lead anywhere. I love Israel. My family lives there. My children were born there. I am passionate about that country. It's one of the most extraordinary places on this planet. But we've got in such a mess, and we are so sure that we are morally correct, and we have become so lost in our sense of, like, you know, the whole world hates us kind of thing. And the truth is that I would guess that over 60% of the country don't think like that.
You've preempted my next question, which was about how you actually get a number on it, because what you've done is clarify why. Golan used or reminded us that members of the administration had actually described October the 7th as a miracle. Because it supports their wider occupation fantasies. And to you've quoted me, I'll quote you. You may well think that they're off their nuts as a consequence of that, but it is largely a wider occupation fantasy, whether for reasons of security or reasons of biblical inheritance. Doesn't really matter if you're on the wrong end of the attempts to bring about that. But that word miracle is going to have reached a lot of my listeners' ears with an air of incredulity, as how on earth could anybody have called it a miracle? And the answer would be that it provided an opportunity to do things which you've just very well described as having been percolating for decades.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to get a lot of pushback from the next sentence I'm about to say, by the way.
Go on.
Here's a people who, let's forget about history, right and wrong. Here's a people who legitimately can claim that they've been persecuted against for about 2,000 years across the world. Absolutely. In more or less in different places. Yes. There is a trauma, a deep-rooted, legitimate trauma, which I myself experience when my children are now worried to go out and wondering if it's okay for them to go out. Exactly. Okay, here in Great Britain. This trauma is very real, and I do not for a second laugh at it or not take it seriously. No. And I have felt it upon myself and in my body myself. And the only thing I know I have going for me is that I happen to be a bald white guy instead of a bald black guy, so people don't see it. This desire for land, this passion for land, is much deeper than many people can understand. It is a leading light. When we finally got a land, it was never going to be enough. We always wanted more. And there has been an underlying push by governments from both sides to how can we expand our land and make it a bit bigger. Okay? And so this is not by all Israelis and not by all leaders at all, but there is an underlying kind of push that we want more space. Land is an obsession in Israel. I mean, land is an obsession for people in general, but in Israel, it's like, if you think people are desperate to buy houses in this country, you should see what it's like there. And there, the cost of living is even harder than here.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, people there getting on the building, what do they call it? The building,
ladder.
What's the expression? Thank you so much. I was going to say
yeah.
block, which is definitely the wrong word. Getting on the housing ladder there is it's a priority beyond anything you can imagine. Having a really good meal and all your friends out and having excess, this sense of extravagance there is considered a miracle. Still, it's part of the psyche. There are people living in isolation, in fear, and nonetheless there are extraordinary people there willing to stand up and be counted. And what Yair Golan did yesterday was brave beyond belief, because he knew the backlash was coming. He, by the way, don't take this as a correction. He is not the head of the opposition. The head of the opposition, which is the largest party, is Yair Lapid, who has been really wishy-washy and scared.
I think I said an opposition leader, but I don't want to split your hairs. I don't want to split.
No, and it's not important. I don't.
He's not even a member of the Knesset at the moment. No, but you're right. Anyway, this is by the by. What he's done is brave because.
And because in the situation you're there in Israel, to stand up and push back and say, listen, we are not holier than thou. We are also human. We also make mistakes. Greed and avarice also comes into our hearts. We are as human as anybody else on this planet. This is sacrilegious in Israel, because we have been told we are the world's most moral army for years. We have been told that we have been persecuted against for 2,000 years, and how can anybody say that we've done anything wrong? We've paid our dues, etc., etc. So it's a much more, and of course he's right.
You've been so helpful. I mean, extraordinarily helpful, given the context of the programme you joined at 10:30. But I wonder whether I want to ask you this question, Mark.
Go for it. Come on.
How likely is it, or how easy is it, or how plausible is it for people who were persuaded, or people who fit into the categories that you described, this curious cognitive dissonance? Some things are true, some things have been carefully cultivated, some things have been exaggerated, all of which helps to explain why Netanyahu has been able to get away with what he's getting away with. But how easy is it for people that were cheering him on or tacitly supporting him 12 months ago, 6 days ago, how easy is it for them to change their mind?
Do you know what the Israelis need more than anything else?
Go on.
Love. Does that answer your question? That's such a weird answer. They need to see that if they take that risk, if they put their foot across that line, that they are not going to be... The fear is so deep-rooted, James.
Yes.
The fear is so deep-rooted. I don't know if you... I mean, your background, you have enough of a history because of the island to know...
I also, doing this job over the years, I've had the privilege of meeting some extraordinary people who've conveyed to me precisely what you described. But you're right, I can never feel it.
And so the bottom line is, I am totally in awe, fundamentally, at the social awareness and compassion of your average Israeli, in spite of everything we've seen in the last 2 years. They are, in my opinion, amongst the most open-minded and liberated people I've met, all of them, not all of them, but they live in fear. And I'm saying this with deep respect for this country, which I consider, in spite of the madness they're going through, deeply open-minded and basically a balanced people, and I love it for that. Israel is I'm a musician. They're like, anybody who knows about music, it's like a 5-to-1 confession ratio, what's going on in Israel. But I can tell you this, if they could really believe, if people could really be persuaded that the world was on their side and was supporting them and would support them moving forward into peace and help protect them, and not leave them feeling alone and like that the world hates them, the majority of Israelis would stand and say, let's go for it, even today.
And the majority of Palestinians as well, I think.
Oh, absolutely. But they are, my ex-partner in the band, this guy from Gaza, who I'm not going to say any names. He pointed out at one thing, and I've heard you say it, and this is so true. This is an asymmetrical situation. The Palestinians cannot move unless the Israelis allow them to move, or they are persuaded to let them move. And so they have no wiggle room. And right now they are just so oppressed that they can't even stop to think about it. On the other hand, as I say that, I am right now helping a couple of Palestinians do a hip-hop album, who reached out to me knowing who I am and what my background is. So maybe that's a good answer to your question.
It is. Of course it is. And that was such a necessary and important call, Mark. Thank you so much. I really mean that.
Thank you for your time.
No, anytime.
You take care.
You take care as well. 10:48 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I think we've possibly received one of the clearest accounts of how this could happen and indeed why this could happen. And before we go to the next junction, just a quick word on one of my all-time favourite observations, one of the things that I think is intrinsic to healthy human discourse, and that is that when you provide explanation, you are not providing excuse. The difference between excuse and explanation is simultaneously immense and tiny. That was explanation. Please don't pretend you heard an excuse.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:52 is the time. A lot of love coming in for Mark, who made some incredible points, some of which I don't know why, because we've talked about this a lot, some of which I hadn't properly appreciated before. But I would remind you why he used the word brave to describe the intervention of Yair Golan. This is the leader of the Israeli Labour Party, not currently a member of the Knesset, but on current numbers, scheduled to get one more seat than the party that is led by Smotrich. But just the words that I read to you at 10 o'clock this morning have seen him accused of outrageous incitement against our soldiers and against the state of Israel by Benjamin Netanyahu. The foreign minister, Gideon Saar, warned that his remarks would certainly add fuel to the fire of anti-Semitism. The defense minister, Israel Katz, called them vile blood libel and said Golan must be ostracized from public life. And then another minister called Shlomo Karhi called the lawmaker a terrorist. And the justice minister called for him to be stripped of his rank of major general. That's what happens when you tell the truth in Israel about Israel. That's what happens. It's absolutely extraordinary. And it's not the truth about every single thing that's happened since 1948. It's the truth about what has happened since October the 7th, 2023. It's a hideous, horrible truth. And what Mark helped me understand was how you can deploy a form of cognitive dissonance to know that it's a hideous, horrible truth, but also to not want it or accept it or cheer it or encourage it, as members of Netanyahu's administration have done, but somewhere deep down inside to think that it's probably necessary because of that legacy of fear and persecution. The legacy of persecution, perfectly real. Much of the fear, perfectly real, but that line there I'd never thought of before, liberal or socialist leaning or humanitarian or leftist people can be persuaded to support very right-wing operations if they feel that their own safety is at risk. I mean, just to bring it back to domestic politics briefly, it's why the small boat situation in this country is blown out of all statistical and sensible proportion, because it creates, when it is exploited by dishonest people and dangerous, divisive people, it creates a fear among decent people that is not logical or founded in reality, but is nonetheless keenly felt. And if you can get that fear in people's hearts, you can, whether it's real or not, then you can get them to do what you want. That's one of the great truths of human history, isn't it? 10:55 is the time. Back to the question of how so many people have applauded or cheered on Benjamin Netanyahu as he led Israel into a place of unprecedented international pariah status. Mohammed is in Ealing. Mohammed, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello, mate.
Hi. I'm a teacher, and I'll keep this really, really brief because I've got a lesson in 2 minutes.
What are you teaching?
Chemistry.
Go on, get on with it.
Look, so two very, very brief, quick points.
Sir's on the radio. Sir, lad, Sir is on the the quick, come and listen.
That.
Sir's on the radio. Go on, I'll shut up. You speak.
So the first thing is, Trump recently went to his state visits around the Arab countries, and amongst the Muslim community in London, there's a massive, massive feeling of betrayal, especially on the part of the Arab countries. They feel the Palestinians feel like there's not been much said by bin Salman or even any of the other leaders with regards to the support for the Palestinians. And it's the sense that, you know, they've made multi-billion-pound deals, but they've not said anything in support for the Gazans. And then the second point would be when you look at the videos that come out of Gaza, it's the resilience of the people of Gaza, and it's really, really inspiring to see. There's a lot said about, you know, jihadis and Islam and the misrepresentation of Islam, but it's their faith that they lean upon, and it's just really, really inspiring to see. So those are the two.
And it flies in the face of claims from many of the people around Netanyahu that there are no innocent people in Gaza, and that of course is why they can't let the cameras in, because if they did, the world would see what you describe. And listen, no one's pretending that Hamas doesn't exist, that Hamas doesn't have a stranglehold on almost every area of public and private life in the Strip, and then that they're a sort of a death cult by most definitions. But I don't know of many points in history where you've blamed the oppressed people for the actions of the oppressors.
Yeah, and I think the tide is definitely turning. People are starting to see, and amongst the government and amongst the population, there has definitely been a tide change.
Well, you've reminded me of a couple of things. I'm going to add Arab acquiescence to my list, if that's an appropriate phrase. The idea that serious leaders in the Arab world could have, rather than giving Donald Trump $400 million jumbo jets, as Qatar has just done, while simultaneously supporting Hamas, of course, something that you'd need to be a Donald Trump supporter to be able to sit comfortably with. The idea that other leaders whose dollars are deeply desired by the West could have done a little bit more to speak up for Palestinian people. Mohammed, what's on the curriculum this morning? What are you doing? What's next? I think it's what we're doing, rates of reaction. So we're actually doing an experiment to see how group 1 metals react with acids. So fun. That's incredible. I do rates of reaction every day, mate.
I can imagine. I've got to shoot, but thank you.
That's I just love that. That's one for the record books, isn't it? I got a chemistry teacher on in May who literally had 4 minutes to speak to me before he had to go into the studio and light up the Bunsen burners. Do they still use? They must still use Bunsen. What else can you use if not a Bunsen burner? It's coming up to 11 o'clock. That's one question answered. We don't normally carry conversations about the Middle East into the second hour of the programme. And I'm going to tell you something. I think I've told you before, and it won't come as a major shock, because the psychic toll it takes on me is the main reason. The tightropes that you have to walk, the occasional idiot that you have to deal with, the vileness of some of the accusations that you have to endure. So you'll allow me the duration of the next news bulletin to decide what we are going to do next. Although I think it's fair to say there's still a lot of room on my list, which has currently got media blackout, victimhood, both very, very real and carefully cultivated by right-wing politicians, Arab acquiescence that Mohammed has just added to the list, and there are probably a few other things too. This is LBC. I'm James O'Brien.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got a little game for you, and I've got an unhinged headline this hour, and then I've got another question which speaks to the ongoing situation regarding Israel, the decision by the Foreign Secretary to call out the monstrous war in Gaza. Do you know how the Daily Mail reports it? Do you want to have a guess? The Foreign Secretary was accused of pursuing an anti-Israel obsession last night after the UK stepped up its criticism of the war in Gaza. Pursuing an anti-Israel obsession. Who do you think said that? Step forward, the actual Israeli ambassador, you know, the one that Sean thought had written David Lammy's speech. She described... I must find the words. She was summoned by David Lammy, probably to give him the next version of the speech. I'm just trying to find who the Daily Mail have found to describe the attacks as monstrous, actually. Leave that one with me. On a much lighter note, guess who wasn't in the House of Commons yesterday for the announcements regarding the Brexit reset that Keir Starmer has negotiated or is negotiating? Guess who wasn't in the House of... Well, no prizes for guessing who wasn't in the House of Commons. Nigel Farage. So where do you think he was? Do you think he was A, doing emergency constituency clinics in Clacton in order to deal with the backlog that has built up since he became the MP? So was he doing constituency clinics in Clacton, where he is, of course, the MP? Was it B, he was in Nice with his trotters up, to quote the great Danny Dyer's comments some years ago about David Cameron? Was he in Nice with his trotters up, or was he receiving teeth whitening treatment on Hartley Street? So Nigel Farage couldn't be bothered to turn up for the Brexit debate yesterday. Make of that what you will. But where do you think he was? Was he A, attending to long overdue constituency business in Clacton-on-Sea? Was he B, in Nice with his trotters up? Or was he C, receiving teeth whitening treatment on Hartley Street? I'll let you choose. A, B, C. You know how to get in touch with the programme. Text 84850 or WhatsApp 03456060973. And for balance, there is a story about Reform UK which is actually quite impressive. They have managed to fulfil a pledge to scrap all LTNs in the councils that they control in record time. Shall I leave you to work out why that is, or shall I tell you now? I think I'll leave you to work out why that is, but don't let me forget. Okay, so something Mark said, and if you weren't listening in the last hour, it's one to listen to. It really is. Something Mark said really resonates with me against the backdrop. And if you weren't listening, essentially he beautifully described, which is an odd word to use in this context, but a lot of you have used it. He beautifully described a mindset that is both contradictory and comprehensible. I can understand the mindset even as I can appreciate the cognitive dissonance contained within it. There are reasons why people who, in every other way, would be humanitarian, compassion, liberal, decent, kind, loving, whatever word you want to use, there are reasons why they can be persuaded to go along with or even support the actions that Israel has taken in Gaza. And I don't know what the date would be. It wouldn't be October the 8th, 2023, would it? The date from which you'd say since, the date from which the actions have been obviously egregious, obviously hideous, and quite probably criminal. I don't know what date you would choose for that, but it doesn't matter because it's gone. That date has passed. Even if it was yesterday for you, that date has passed. How hard is it? Nothing wrong with supporting Israel's responses in October of 2023. This is my opinion. You're welcome to challenge it, but it's not really the point of the conversation that we're having now. So everybody talked about the need for a response. Everybody talked about the necessity of a robust response. A few people dared to whisper the word proportional quite early on. They would say it needs to be proportional. But nobody had a really clear idea of what disproportionate meant or what disproportion would look like. Huge swathes of the Gaza Strip razed to the ground, tens of thousands of people dead, children facing imminent starvation, malnutrition rife, and aid workers and journalists being shot for, or sometimes looked like fun, frankly, from where we sit, unable to send journalists into the Gaza Strip and relying instead upon either Israeli propaganda or the brave people that can get some footage and information out through various channels. So I don't know how easy it is to recognise that we've moved into wrongness. And I mean now for somebody probably someone who is Israeli and or Jewish. To recognise that while you were perhaps even reluctantly in favour of the initial response, you have to recognise, and it doesn't mean that people like me get to berate you, because everybody had a different point at which they realised it had gone too far. So recognising that you have somehow ended up supporting ethnic cleansing and quite possibly genocide, recognising that you've somehow ended up supporting it can lead you in one of two ways. You either double down and deny at the same time, so you double down on your support and deny either the evidence of your own eyes and ears or the language that is used by people like Kenneth Roth and Yair Golan, or you do what John Maynard Keynes probably didn't encourage us to do, but everybody thinks that he did, which is change your mind. When the facts change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do? And yet the sad truth is, of course, that many of us don't change our minds when the facts change. We keep our scarves of loyalty, our tribal affiliations, so tightly bolted to our consciences that the conscience ends up being strangled. I can't really tell you what I believe because I'm blinded by my fealty and loyalty to this cause, this group, this football team, this political party, this country, this character, this politician, this government. How hard is it? I've tried really hard over the last 18 months to keep the phone lines open on this subject, even when it was pretty horrible for almost everybody involved. I've tried pretty hard. It's probably one of the reasons why I had to come off Twitter, actually, or why I decided to come off Twitter, because you couldn't avoid the hideousness since Elon Musk gave kind of amplification and encouragement to people that you could once just block and keep out of your feed altogether. But how I've tried to recognise all sides, to explain from the start, whoever it may have annoyed, that the actions of Hamas on October the 7th were not justified by anything that had happened in 20th or 21st century history. Never could be. And I've tried very hard to recognise and to explain repeatedly that the necessity of the existence of the modern state of Israel is something that I believe in passionately. And that has upset an awful lot of people as well. I don't just get the abuse from the people who will today be calling Israeli war heroes anti-Semites. I don't just get the abuse from them. I get it from the people who think that it's disgusting to suggest that Israel deserves any sympathy or support in any context whatsoever, ever, going right back to 1948 and quite possibly beyond. I've got them in my inbox, although I think they're probably a bit too grim for inclusion in Idiot's Corner. I'd need a whole new box, wouldn't I? But here's the thing, I don't know how hard it would be now. Do you watch the Louis Theroux documentary? Do you keep an eye on the death count, even as people are constantly importuning you not to believe it? Don't believe it because it's Hamas. It comes from Hamas. Believe the IDF, but don't believe Hamas. Even that must strain a bit now. That must be hard now. IDF shooting up aid workers and lying about it until the footage from some dead man's phone found in his pocket completely disproves the line put out by the Israeli authorities. You still believe them every time they tell you X has happened and other people say no, it was Y? How hard is it? How hard is it to say what happened on October the 7th was disgusting, but I, as a supporter of Israel, but no longer a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu, I recognise that what has happened since is also disgusting. And if you're going to do it statistically and do it exclusively by numbers, it's more disgusting by a factor, isn't it? By a factor of 10 or 20 or 30. What is it? How hard is it? Because I know it isn't necessarily the first port of call for public sympathy. That goes to the people of Palestine at the moment, the people of Gaza. But I have enormous sympathy for people who Mark described in his call. People who, for historic and modern reasons, are susceptible to the lies of Netanyahu, susceptible to the saber-rattling and warmongering of a Smotrich or a Katz, and have perhaps in the last 24 hours, as a consequence of British, Canadian, French interventions, perhaps further ago than that, have realised, oh my God, I've ended up supporting something that is unsupportable. I've ended up supporting something that is utterly reprehensible, that is egregious, that is disgusting, that is ethnic cleansing under almost any definition of those words. I've ended up supporting it, and I don't. I've ended up supporting it, and I don't. That is the definition of cognitive dissonance. I support it, but I don't support it. How hard is it? In Israel, how hard would it be to turn on Netanyahu? Because enough people haven't to make sure that this madness ends, this horror ends. How hard is it to recognise that for perfectly understandable and even sympathetic reasons, you've ended up, what's the word I want? Facilitating the horrors that Netanyahu and his hideous cronies have inflicted upon the people of Gaza. Maybe that language isn't helpful, but how hard is it? Look, if you're the kind of person who used to send me messages saying, why haven't you mentioned Hamas, when I had 3, 4, 5 times in the space of a 10-minute monologue, do you ever get pause? Do these people ever pause and think, oh my gosh, this is the moment that, for me, the scales fall from my eyes and I see what I have supported in all its hideous, blood-soaked horror? I don't know. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I hope that you will give me a call on that. You know, at least I hope you know, that you'll be in receipt of a sympathetic ear, because it's a horrible situation in which to find yourself. Not as horrible as being a hungry kid in Gaza, I grant you, but I'm not a hungry kid in Gaza, so I can empathise with both positions. How hard is it to recognise that you're part of the problem and not the solution? 0345 6060 973. Yvonne says, it's like domestic violence. You end up agreeing with and enabling your abuser due to historic fear. I don't know. I mean, happily, I haven't been on the receiving end of either. Carol says, thank you, James, for covering this subject so thoughtfully. It's hard with Jewish family to have any discussion at all about confronting, because the narrative of a lifetime is too painful. Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza by Mark Beenart is a book that I would recommend. I don't know. I want you to tell me. How hard is it? What is that wrestle, that moral wrestling like? That realisation that for absolutely understandable historic reasons and personal reasons, you ended up supporting something that was utterly, utterly wrong. 0345 6060 973. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question is one that I feel was always going to have to be asked. The point at which Benjamin Netanyahu's conduct became absolutely indefensible, except for fellow extremists, fellow travellers who would turn upon an Israeli politician and military veteran and accuse him of vile blood libel, accuse him of anti-Semitism, accuse him of being a terrorist for the crime of calling for the killing of babies to stop. And of course, I missed out in my endless introduction. I missed out the people who are still on the side, still cheering it on. More babies killed, please. That's why they've all picked upon his use of the word hobby instead of focusing upon the substance of what he has said. So how hard is it to reconsider, recalibrate? Maria's in Barnet. Maria, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Maria.
Hi. Just to say that you can support the right of Israel to exist, and you can very painfully disapprove of what the Netanyahu government is doing. But the fear is that your criticism of Netanyahu can feed those who want to end the state totally, yes, and threaten the millions and millions of people who live there, both Arab, Jew and Christian. And this is why it's so difficult, incredibly difficult. It's not a simple yes or no at all. And he has made a terrible situation by identifying Israel and even the Jewish people with his actions. And that's not right. It's a very, very difficult situation. And I say that as somebody who is descended from people who always lived in Jerusalem. We're not European Jews, we're Jews of the Middle East,
yes,
who always lived under the British Mandate of Palestine and under the Ottomans. And that narrative is being erased. It's all about Europe and go back to Poland and Germany. No. People come from the Middle East and they were thrown out. And my family were from Palestine under the British.
I understand.
So do you see how difficult
I know.
it is?
Of course I do. I understand almost all of it. No one on this programme would ever be allowed to say anything like go back to Poland or go back to Germany. And all of the conversations we've conducted have been contingent upon the modern state of Israel, containing all the constituent parts that you described. But you really did make me think of something then, because I don't know whether you're aware of this, Mira, but I do have a habit of interrupting people a little bit too much when they call into the programme. But you, when you said then that if you were to criticise Netanyahu, you would somehow be allied with the people who want the destruction of Israel, want Israel to be wiped off the map. And I nearly picked you up on that, but it would have been wrong for me to do so because that's your heartfelt belief. And it's also something that people like Suella Braverman have encouraged when they described anybody supporting the Palestinian cause and objecting to Israel's actions or Netanyahu's government's policies in this place as being Hamas supporters. That's the first time I've understood why they do that. Because she wanted anybody who criticised Israel to be conflated with supporters of Hamas. That's what you're describing, I think.
Well, in a way, but it's important to recognise what they're dealing with and what the Palestinians are dealing with.
But that's why they've called him a terrorist. That's why they've called Golan a terrorist. I didn't get it. He's a terrorist because he's asked Israel to stop killing babies.
No, he's not. It's wrong. The whole situation has gone crazy. The question is, how can it be sorted? I do not know.
No, well, that's why we're not asking that question today.
Do you see? No,
Yes,
but you're asking about the state of Israel's actions, the government of Israel's actions. I think now have become very, very difficult for many to defend. And yet they recognise what else are they meant to do. They're still firing rockets. There's food, electricity, everything for Hamas. Their fighters are safe. Their leaders are safe. If not, they're probably in Doha with Qatar.
But you realise surely now that none of that justifies starving children.
I think none of it not only does not justify starving children, that pays and gives Hamas exactly what they want. The more terrible the suffering of the ordinary Palestinian, the more Hamas can say we have to continue. They won't give up the hostages that they're holding.
Well, they would have done under the terms of the ceasefire that Israel chose to break.
They say they would have done.
No. They kept to the terms of it entirely, and then Israel broke it.
I think the way they behaved, James, I think it's a very difficult subject. They said they gave back the Bibas family, and the family had to ask again, even for the bodies, the right bodies of the mother.
That is a different and very harrowing story. But I don't want to have an argument. I don't want to have an argument. But the hostages could and would have been returned according to the ceasefires that were agreed and broken by Israel.
But that's why the Israeli people are divided about Netanyahu.
Yes.
We've got to understand the distinction between people, government, and state. We talk about, say, America and Vietnam. It was very different between what people thought, the government thought, the state. Israel is not defined by Benjamin Netanyahu. He does not have the right. The best thing would be to have some sort of, as the Americans used to say, regime change. That sounds ghastly, but he has led them into a horrendous Armageddon situation for the Palestinians and for his own people.
Can I ask you, you don't have to answer this, because I don't know whether you'll be able to. I don't know if anybody can really, but when was the breaking point? Because as we've said many times, on October the 8th, not everybody, some people were protesting outside the Israeli embassy before all of the bodies had even been counted after the Hamas massacre. But generally speaking, the world was very sympathetic to and deeply supportive of Israel in that moment, certainly the world we inhabit. And now it isn't, as we've both acknowledged. When for you did the pivotal point unfold?
There were two, and one leads to the other because it's a conflict of emotion at the same time.
Yes, of course.
So as we got reports of of more and more civilians being moved on, which was a good thing. Move them out of the way to get they wanted to get the terrorists. They were moving. They were giving warning. They weren't. But what for me was when it didn't seem to be getting anywhere. So we have figures which I don't know who to believe. I do not believe the Hamas figures because they reissued them quietly, if you recall. They did
they reissued them.
So how can you reissue a death toll? And when there were
because
attacks
for the same
hospital,
the same reason that they couldn't return the body parts of the family that you mentioned, because
the same reason, James. Do you remember the bombing of the hospital?
Let's not play whataboutery. That would be a disservice to both of us and to our listeners. But the reason why death tolls need to be revised is because these are not neat, countable bodies that we're talking about.
But they're issued very, very quickly. So. For me,
yes, because people need them. But again, let's not get distracted. Tell me again about the points where you moved. Yes.
It combined when the children when the photographs of babies here who've been held hostage were torn alongside the death of Palestinian children. That combination broke me. The sight of no sympathy among the people who were supporting Hamas, tearing photos of babies that had been kidnapped and then killed without emotion, and then the realization they were being killed and Palestinian children being killed. The two combined totally. Nobody wants to see the children killed anywhere. I don't believe any Jew or any Muslim, a believing person, wants that.
Well, members of Netanyahu's government do.
Members of Netanyahu's government are a bunch of tarts for hire who have gone into the government. I
think it's worse than that. I think they're ideologues.
They're a very small minority. You keep talking about the Louis Theroux.
They're in charge.
They're in charge at the moment.
Well, but they're in charge of the.
They're not going to be in charge.
Okay.
They're not going to stay there. The country's going to have a reawakening.
Well, we shall see.
It's going to have a reawakening, James.
And that is, something I'd be reluctant to say, actually, because I don't have the connection to the country that you have and that you explained so helpfully at the beginning. I don't know that would happen against the context of what Mark described, because all you have is a pause until another demagogue comes along and uses historical fear, historical trauma, uses history itself to persuade people that they should sacrifice their liberty and other people's lives upon the altar of their threatened security. Thank you, Maria. 27 after 11, 2 questions running if you're just joining us. The first about how hard it is to recognise that Netanyahu has been the biggest betrayer of the Israeli cause, 03456060973. And the first question leading into the second one, really, how on earth did we end up in this situation? Or rather, how on earth did Israel end up in a situation where its leader would have done more damage to Israel's credibility, reputation, status on the world stage than any other player in this sorry saga? That's actually an incredible thing to reflect upon. Hamas, and this is why, of course, members of Netanyahu's government called the atrocities of October the 7th a miracle. Hamas delivered Israel the world's support and the world's sympathy. It's the Prime Minister of Israel who has not just squandered it, but transformed it into, well, at least disapproval, and at most, including in my case, disgust. How on earth was Benjamin Netanyahu able to transform sympathy and support into disapproval and disgust? That's a question for the ages. We'll return to both of those. The question about what has happened and how hard it is to acknowledge, and the question about how on earth Netanyahu could have squandered sympathy and support and transformed it into disapproval and disgust on an extraordinary international stage. And I shall, on a much lighter note, provide you with the answer to my mystery question as soon as we get back from the news headlines. The question today was the so-called godfather of Brexit couldn't be bothered to turn up in the House of Commons for the announcements and conversations about Brexit yesterday. Nigel Farage is the man of whom, of course, I speak. And was he not there because A, he was attending to constituency business in Clacton, B, he was in Nice with his trotters up, or C, because he was having teeth whitening work done on Harley Street? I shall provide you with the answer, and I'll give you the results as well, because it's quite an even split so far. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is extraordinary. A couple of texts that have absolutely undone me. Thank you. The first is from Shahaf. James, this is why I listen to you every day. You've captured my cognitive dissonance perfectly. I was born in Israel. I will always support Israel, but I will never support Netanyahu or his cronies. The Israel I support no longer exists. That's why I left 10 years ago. It became unbearable. In the 90s, Israel was a modern liberal country. Now it's a far-right, nationalistic, messianic state led by religious zealots. This didn't begin recently. The roots go back to the late 70s with Gush Emunim and the 80s with Meir Kahane. Israeli society has always been plagued by internal sectarianism, and that fuels the footballification of politics. People support Netanyahu not because they believe him, but simply because they hate the other side. I'll never forget, 25 years ago, I was at a protest against Netanyahu when he was finance minister and slashing welfare. A woman stood on the sidelines shouting that he was taking food from her children. I asked why she wouldn't join us. Her answer, because you love the Arabs. And that I can't believe it took Maria's call for me to realise why people like Suella Braverman accused anybody of marching in solidarity with people being murdered in Gaza, people being killed in Gaza, were supporters of Hamas. And now I do. Now it's crystal clear to me. And this also coming in, this from Ben. The biggest issue as a British Jew is that when you criticise the Russian government, you are criticising the Russian government, not the Russian people, and not Russia's right to exist as a country. Let me tell you, James, a huge percent of Israelis and Jews are very unhappy with what is going on in private, but won't state this publicly. Why? Because most criticism of Israel online is not just of the Israeli government, but of all the Israeli people and Jews worldwide, with Jews being individually called baby killers. This has happened to me, myself, and I'm a medical student in Britain, so none of it has anything to do with me. Criticism of this extremist Israeli government is often baked in anti-Semitism, which makes a Jew feel targeted and makes us genuinely think that Israel is the only safe place for us, and hence we can't bring ourselves to call out the government publicly. But trust me, in private it is there. This is the worst I've ever felt about my identity, ever. I want to be a Zionistic Jew living alongside a Palestinian state in peace, but that viewpoint isn't enough for most of Western social media. I have to want my state to be wiped off the map. Gosh, I'm not going to... I mean, I can't tell you that you're wrong because your feelings are heartfelt and heartbreaking, actually, Ben. But, social media might be a reflection of some elements of reality. It's not a reflection of all of it. But otherwise, I don't have anything to say about your comments except that I'm sorry. 11:36 is the time. The answer, of course, to the question of what Nigel Farage was doing instead of attending a debate about the Brexit, that he did more than many to inflict upon this country, and Keir Starmer's attempts to undo some of that damage. He was not having his teeth whitened on Harley Street, which was actually the most popular answer from people who responded, by some distance, actually. I thought the comment about having the moss removed was a bit unkind. Neither was he attending a constituency for his clinic for his constituents in Clacton, and you're going to think I've exaggerated this, which absolutely nobody suggested. Not one person suggested that he was in Clacton doing constituency work as an MP, as the elected MP for Clacton. The correct answer is that he is in Nice with his trotters up. Or at least we know he's in the European Union somewhere, probably France, and the trotters up line is, thanks to Danny Dyer, close to irresistible. 11:37 is the time. PMQs on the way, of course, at 12 o'clock. And if you're wondering about what happens when you speak out against Benjamin Netanyahu, well, Yair Golan can tell you. Military veteran, senior politician, leader of the labour movement in Israel itself, but apparently a terrorist, according to the communications minister, a man who must be ostracised from public life, according to the defence minister, who also accused him of a vile blood libel. You've got a foreign minister saying that he will certainly add fuel to the fire of anti-Semitism, and you've got the Prime Minister accusing him of an outrageous incitement against our soldiers and against the state of Israel. So if you're wondering why it's hard to speak out against Benjamin Netanyahu, whether you're a British radio presenter or whether you are a an Israeli Jew who will do it in private but not in public, as Ben has just described, then there's your answer. You can be a military veteran and a senior politician and simply stating that you should probably stop killing the children now, and you get accused of terrorism by the actual communications minister, which is kind of the same rhetoric that Suella Braverman deployed when describing peaceful marchers and peaceful protesters in London. Mark's in Deptford. Steer us back to the question of how it reached such a horrible pass. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
It's there's obviously so many aspects to this, but I was initially going to sort of ask if I could list a few statistics about Israel's behaviour, specifically about children killed prior to the 7th of October.
I don't want to sound ungrateful or as if that's not relevant, but it's not about that. It's about very specifically the hemorrhaging of sympathy and support after October the 7th. It's not about how did Israel think it could get away with it, or how many precedents there are for suggesting that the response to the October the 7th atrocity is not an isolated incident in history. It's a very clear question about what's happened since October the 7th that has seen one government led by one man hemorrhage unprecedented international support and sympathy and replace it with widespread disapproval and disgust.
Well, I think for Netanyahu, there was never any question of where the line was. So I did think to myself, has he ever thought, or has his government ever thought, where is the line where we will lose support? I don't think that's ever, I don't actually think that that is a question for them. I think that we've found where our line is, and that's pictures of children dying of starvation. And that is where our government and other governments around the world, although we are kind of late to that. I know that Spain kind of led the way with that, which was very admirable. I personally would have thought that the line, would have come a long time ago, and especially when the medics were killed. I was shocked at how little, was reported, or how Israel would just seem to not make so much of a news story, and that just suggests that to me that Israel, the Israeli government are so blinded by the impunity that they have.
If you think of blinded and empowered at the same time, it's interesting. If we forget about Donald Trump, and if only we could, you look at Joe Biden and latterly Keir Starmer. I think you're right. I think there's some evidence for it as well in things that he's said in the past, Netanyahu, and certainly things that many of his senior ministers have said very recently. I don't know that they ever thought that there was a finish line or a point of no return. They've made it pretty clear, of course, that even in the event of all the hostages being released, the hostilities would not end, something that an awful lot of his supporters don't seem to know or understand or care about. But it's quite a hard thing to grasp. And politics is often the art of the compromise. I wonder whether leaders like Biden and Starmer just presumed, even though they couldn't identify it, that there would be a full stop, that there would, or at least a semicolon, there would be a point at which it would end. And what the blockade has done, as you rightly identify, is perhaps drive home to them that without external influence, without external pressure, they're never going to stop.
Yeah. I mean, I think that...
and that's genocide territory. If they're never going to stop, it ceases to be a dispute or a debate about the meaning of words or the relevance of a legal judgment. If they never stop the path that they're on, that's the only place they can end up.
I mean, I was very impressed with what David Lammy said last night, but then I got up this morning and watched the interview on LBC, which Keir Starmer gave, when he said that Israel had the right to cut off water and power to Gaza.
I mean, listen, I'm not here to defend Keir Starmer, but I was in the building when that happened, and he walked it back immediately.
Yeah.
It can be a weird place, a radio studio. There is absolutely no suggestion that he continued making that point or supporting that position within 6 seconds of the microphone coming off in the studio. But that doesn't matter. I mean, it's not much of a defence to say you said something stupid, whether you meant it or not. But it's not. I mean, it's not relevant to this conversation. It's a bit of a thing that's reached for by people who think symbolism is more important than policy. I'm not accusing you of that. I just don't think. Because that's what they've responded to now. I don't think they contemplated until a lot later than a lot of other people the possibility that this government at this time would never stop.
But that's what is so.
And that's why your historical perspective would perhaps have been more pertinent than I allowed at the beginning of this call, because you could have said they did this, and this, and therefore it was clear that they wouldn't stop at that in 2024 or in 2025. Yeah,
it's almost like why wouldn't Israel think that they could get away with this? So what has ever been shown we've never suggested that this is the line. We've never said that this is the line. We've certainly never acted like there's a line. And it's the whole since the call with the guy Mark, obviously it's a fascinating call. Since that call, the change, the things that you've been talking about, it just made me think, like, from October the 7th, I remember having conversation with friends about, and there was such a strong kind of like stance on Israel has a right to defend itself.
Yes.
And I pushed back on that quite a lot, because I'm somebody who's taken an interest in the conflict for quite a number of years. I won't go into the whole historical thing again, like you said.
But no, actually, you can if you want. I mean, I didn't want to start with it because I didn't think it would be helpful, but it would be helpful now.
Well, that's the thing. With a conflict like this and with the Israel-Palestine crisis, it's so easy to use sentences like Israel has a right to defend itself. But then when you look into the more nuanced, politics of the whole thing, questions like does a state have a right to defend itself against the people that they are occupying? And the thing is as well, now when I'm saying this, I feel like I immediately need to say, and I'm not defending Hamas.
No, I know you're not. But you will be accused of it. You will be. Look, mate, if Golan can be accused of being a terrorist, then no one's going to hesitate to accuse you of supporting them.
Yeah.
Are they?
Yeah. And I remember having arguments with friends about this, and I was going on the marches, the pro-Palestine marches from quite early on, and the whole demonisation of the people who were on them marches. It was a hideous
moment. It was a hideous moment.
Yeah. And the majority of the people that I saw on those marches, the majority were women. It was very peaceful. It was a pro-peace march. They were pro-peace marches. They weren't even, they weren't, and the whole demonisation of that, the whole rhetoric around Israel as a right to
you found one person with what may have been a Hamas flag, or you found one person holding up a hideous and offensive placard, and if you were a certain type of journalist or politician, you pretended that represented the entire crowd, although some of those journalists apparently struggle to understand the conflation that they indulge in on an almost daily basis. Find me an immigrant who's done something wrong, I'll turn you against immigration. Find me an asylum seeker that's done something wrong, I'll turn you against all asylum seekers, up to and including the point where a woman calls for them to be set on fire and then has Boris Johnson defending her and accusing Keir Starmer of having done something wrong. That I don't think we noticed at the time, probably because our brains are so boiled by recent events. Here's the thing. I'm interested in your response to this. Marks are having a good day. That's 2 marks now. When people said, and I wonder whether I was guilty of this, mate, actually, just between you and me, that when people were talking about the necessity of Israel defending itself and Israel's inalienable right to defend itself, I wonder if we were being a little bit more Old Testament, and what we actually meant as we saw those hideous images from October the 7th is that Israel deserves and must take revenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that there's a lot of truth in that, and I honestly think that there's a real... it's interesting. A few weeks ago, there was a report about Keir Starmer came out and spoke about Russia bombing the hospital. The previous day, Israel had bombed a hospital, and there was no mention of it. And it's been over 18 months of being constantly on a daily basis flabbergasted at how this is being reported, how politicians are allowed to get away with the double standards, and And that's how to make it as simple as possible, that is why Israel has found themselves where they are. I don't even necessarily blame them.
No, of course.
If they have been, there's that, it's kind of a meme now, but if somebody shows you who they are, believe them.
Believe them the first time. It's not a meme, it's Maya Angelou. I'd say, because I think we're both wary of simplism or oversimplifying things. All I'd say is, and I know some people prefer a pithy slogan or a T-shirt to reality, but I've been thinking quite a lot about the new leader of Syria in the last couple of days, where they're set to see sanctions lifted. And leaving aside the chief supporters of Hamas giving Donald Trump a $400 million jumbo jet, or trying to, and he desperately wants it. You've got a man who was, certainly a member of an Islamist insurgent group. I think he was allied with Al Qaeda and ISIS.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah,
and now they're rolling the red carpet out for him from Western embassies. So things are always a heck of a lot more complicated than most of the coverage allows, aren't they?
Yeah, and also, the one question, one of the things that's frustrated me so much, because people are so scared of being accused of sympathising with Hamas's.
Yeah.
Unless you have a very, how can I put it, a very sort of
thick skin.
No, a very warped sense of human beings.
Yes.
To think that a group of people would get up and commit October the 7th just out of the blue, I think...
Without context, with no context whatsoever. Context. Yes, yeah. But that is... you're right.
We can't ask that question. We are not allowed to ask that question.
Why did this happen?
Yeah.
Not excuse, but explain. A crucial distinction that we talked about earlier in the programme.
Yeah. And nobody can ask that question. We are not allowed to ask that question. And I can feel my heart beating now by even saying that on the radio, because I know what people will say. What is the
historical context of this latest episode in an old or an ongoing and long-term conflict? And you're right. I think a lot of people perhaps had it presented to them as a sort of aberration, as an explosion from normality, rather than just as a much worse than usual example of exchanges of atrocities or exchange of attacks. Thank you, Mark. It is 10 to 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:53. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know what habeas corpus is? It's one of those phrases that is bandied around fairly liberally. And it's a crucial part of the sort of foundation stones of liberal democracy. The protection of the civilian, the protection of the citizen against an overbearing executive or against a despotic monarch or leader. Habeas corpus. I don't know how you pronounce it, because it's very hard these days to find people who speak Latin as a native language. Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't, by the way. He just learns a few choice phrases by heart and then pretends he's got a facility with the whole of the classics. Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course. This is a country where the wronger you are, the more likely you are to get a knighthood or put into the House of Lords. But even by the standards of Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Marc Francois popped up in the House of Commons yesterday. That was a blast from the past. Even by the standards of the Lords of Wrongness themselves, like Frost and Hannan and the rest of them, there is one member of the American administration who is rewriting the book on wrongness. In fact, you know that classic, I wonder if you can think of what classic Tony Hancock line, arguably his most famous line of all, How to Alienate Younger Listeners, chapter 366. Tony Hancock, one of the finest comic geniuses of all time. What might be my favourite line of his of all time was brought to mind by some comments recently by Kristi Noem, who was asked at a Senate hearing whether or not she knew what habeas corpus actually means. Now, you may not have heard of her. You may not think that's important. You don't know what habeas corpus means. But she is the Homeland Security Chief. She's the Homeland Security Secretary. Habeas corpus, if you don't know, is the right that the citizen has to question his or her incarceration. It means that the government has to present a valid reason for locking you up. So it's pretty clear, right, what habeas corpus is. I think it means literally you have the body, doesn't it? Habeas, habeo, habeas, habeat, habeamus, habeatis, habeant. Wouldn't it be? Corpus, as in Corpus Christi, body of Christ. So habeas, you have. Keith's nodding. I tell a lie. There is one person who can speak fluent Latin. Keithus Maximus. I would have thought it was pretty easy to find out. But do you remember the caller we had earlier this week? I think his name was Richard. And it was an extraordinary admission live on air that he's got incredibly strong opinions, but he doesn't actually understand anything. I mean, it was one of those moments. It was like we were back in 2016, 2017. What Donald Trump has done is promote people like that to positions that, and in many ways what Reform UK does, is promote people like that to positions of major power and influence. In many ways, that's what makes them useful to Donald Trump. You're never going to get any criticism or pushback from somebody who struggles to tie their own shoelaces. So who am I going to put in charge of Homeland Security? Well, what are the basic requirements for being in charge of Homeland Security, especially when you consider that the kind of demon-in-chief, Stephen Miller, has suggested that the president may suspend habeas corpus. In other words, he may enable that Donald Trump may seek to lock people up without any just cause whatsoever. I know he's doing that already, but he will be doing it somehow officially, or it will be a state-sanctioned incarceration of people at the whim of a president or his closest cronies. So what would be the most basic requirement of a Homeland Security Secretary? Well, look, there's no earthly way that she wouldn't actually know what habeas corpus means.
So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President
habeas
Lincoln
corpus,
used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the Live Free or Die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let us be clear, though,
it has never been done. It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress.
Incredible, that. So I don't know what it is. I'm going to describe almost the polar opposite of what it is as what it is, and then I'm going to announce that I support it. Known in British politics as farraging. But that is an intervention of almost unprecedented awfulness, because it's not fun. Well, it is funny, but it's not funny. A lot of people picking me up on the pronunciation. No, get lost. Seriously, get us losters. How do you know how the Romans spoke? I say habeas, you say habeas. You say tomato, I say tomato, you say I say tomato, you say tomato. Let's call the whole thing off. I'm not going to be picked up on my pronunciation of Latin words by you. That's outrageous. Habeas, habeat, habeo, habeas, habeat, habeamus, habeatis, habeant. How about that? It's nearly 12 noon. It's Thursday tomorrow. It's Wednesday today, which means PMQs. See, you got me all flustered now with your Latin criticism. Oh, and the joke. Come on. Did Magna Carta die in vain? That is a demonstration of the misunderstanding of Latin, classic Latin phrases on a par with the Tony Hancock joke. But unfortunately, she is a joke, but it wasn't one. Natasha Clark is here to talk us through what we might expect to come up in Latin.
Probably not any Latin. I don't know.
Primus
I don't
inter
know.
pares. Primus inter pares is the Prime Minister in many ways.
Very good.
According to Cabinet Government, first among equals.
Oh, nice. I don't know any Latin at all. And I think that's funny because I went to a school called the Royal Latin School and they didn't teach us a word of Latin for 7 years.
Outrageous.
It's quite outrageous. The state of schools in this country. But yes, I think that's probably not going to come up in Prime Minister's questions, the definition of habeas? Habeas?
You better say habeas, otherwise everyone will get cross with you.
Then they'll say that, it's because you're posh.
Do you say scone or scone?
Scone.
Do you?
Yeah, scone.
Oh, yeah, so do I.
Is that okay? Does that mean that we're the same level as posh?
It means we're a bit northern.
What, scone?
I think so. My mum always said scone. She's from Sheffield. Anyway, quick PMQs.
We shouldn't open up the debate about whether you put on cream or jam first, should we? I think it's going to be tax and Gaza today. You've of course read the story on the front page of the Telegraph, which is purporting, and we know how much Kemi Badenoch reads the Telegraph.
Yes, that's a good point.
So that Angela Rayner was looking to try and apparently, according to this report, look at urge Rachel Reeves to look at some taxes to put up ahead of the spending review in the budget earlier this year. And of course, we had that spectacular statement yesterday from David Lammy in the House of Commons over Gaza, and it's very clear that the government's position on Gaza and Israel has changed overnight. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from some backbenchers on that too.
But not from Badenoch.
You know, it was something that Priti Patel was quite punchy on yesterday. They got into quite a ding-dong in the House.
Priti Patel would be the minister that got fired from a British cabinet for having secret meetings with officials from the Israeli government that she didn't declare to her own prime minister.
And the shadow foreign secretary.
Yeah, so who wouldn't invite her views on Israel-UK relations?
The shadow foreign secretary, potentially.
No, I know, but that's the point. It's a criticism of the person that appointed her, not just the people that interview her.
A very good point. But yes, I imagine that it could be something that Kemi Badenoch will go on, purely because she believes that there is support to be gained from a support of Israel. However, it very much felt that listening to the Commons yesterday, the tide is turning on Israel and Gaza. You were hearing from across the chamber, across the political spectrum, how concerned people were about the Netanyahu government's actions and what that meant for British relationships. It very much feels that we've turned a corner there. So she might choose not to go in on that. I think, like I say, if I were her, I would go in on this Telegraph report instead.
Not to make light of the Telegraph report, but essentially it means that not everybody in the cabinet privately agrees about everything.
Exactly, and I think...
Well, zippity-doo-dah.
Well, when was the last time you saw a leak?
It's a good leak. That's the story. The fact that somebody is trying to cause... Who do you think has leaked?
Well, I was speaking with Aggie Schombre about this just a minute ago, and we're divided. I think it will be the Treasury. She thought it would be probably someone from Angela Rayner's department. So we're split on this. I think it might be the Treasury, proving that that there is dissent in the cabinet. But actually,
we are resolute. Look, we're dealing with it from all sides, but we are committed to our cause. Or Angela Rayner currying a lot of favour among the more left-wing of the parliamentary party who are increasingly angry about the spending squeeze. I mean, it's close to a wealth tax, right, this?
It is. And what it shows is that there are people in government, at the very top of government, that are not 100% happy with how Rachel Reeves is running the economy.
Why would anybody give it to the Telegraph just because they'd go biggest with it?
Yeah, I think tax, Angela Rayner, those two things tick two boxes for the Telegraph. So I'd assume that'd be why.
Not to try to drive divisions between you and Ms. Schombre.
I'm happy to. We should have both come on and debated who we thought leaked it.
No, God's sake. No, well, we'll find out after this.
Mr. Speaker, it's extraordinary listening to that last answer from the Prime Minister. Inflation was 2% when Conservatives left office. 2%. It's now nearly double that. When will he recognise that it's Labour's budget driving up inflation?
I think what she forgot to say was over 11% on their watch, and she didn't say a word. I am confident those numbers will come down, Mr. Speaker. The Bank of England is confident those numbers will come down. That's why we've seen 4 interest rates in a row. But I notice she can't resist grabbing any opportunity to talk the country down. She doesn't mention the growth figures, the interest rate figures, record investment, wages up more than prices, 200,000 jobs created, 4 trade deals. And the reason, Mr. Speaker, they haven't learned, they haven't changed, and as George Osborne said, she doesn't have a credible economic plan.
Mr. Speaker, this is laughable from the Prime Minister. He knows that inflation was brought down by us to 2%, bang on target. We were reacting to a war in Ukraine that brought inflation up all over Europe. While he is doing trade deals with countries like the US and India, their inflation is going down. It's going up here. Why? The ONS says the inflation figures are driven by significant increases in household bills. We warned him repeatedly that this is exactly what would happen, what his policies would do. We called it Awful April. The Prime Minister came into office saying that he would tackle the cost of living crisis. He has failed. He hasn't got a clue, has he?
Mr. Speaker, she talks of their record, the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget. Inflation through the work. They left a £22 billion black hole. Living standards at an all-time low. Energy prices through the roof. Mortgages through the roof. And Mr. Speaker, we're taking measures to bring prices down. That EU deal will bring prices down. That's why supermarkets welcomed it. What did she do? She opposes measures to bring prices down.
Mr. Speaker, he needs to stop whining about what the last government did and look at what he is doing. He is the Prime Minister. Look at the numbers this morning. As if inflation figures weren't bad enough, we've also learned that the Deputy Prime Minister is on manoeuvres. He's lost control of the economy. He's lost control of his cabinet. She's sitting there staring at me. She knew exactly what she was doing when she briefed that into the papers. She is demanding, Mr. Speaker, 8 new tax rises, as if we haven't suffered enough. People out there are struggling. Businesses are struggling. People are losing their jobs. We cannot have more tax rises. Will the Prime Minister rule out new tax rises this year?
Mr. Speaker, she's not learned or changed. They lost the election because their appalling record on the NHS, on health, on prisons, you name it. And now she accuses everyone of whining about the impact that had on the country. It had a huge impact on working people across the country, and they're absolutely right to complain about it. She wants to talk about the Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister, working with the Chancellor, building 1.5 million new homes, reforming our planning system, putting £7 billion into our economy, and bringing forward our employment rights bill, which is the single biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation.
That's desperate stuff. The whole House would have heard the Prime Minister refuse to rule out new tax rises. The whole House heard it. He didn't rule it out. That his cabinet is open warfare. The Deputy Prime Minister clearly calling the shots. What is it that we've learned? We're heading for new tax rises. We know inflation is up. It's just more and more bad news from a Prime Minister who has lost control. So we heard his earlier answer, Mr. Speaker. We heard his earlier answer on winter fuel. Let's try and get some more information. I'm going to ask him a simple question. It only requires one word, yes or no. Is he planning to U-turn on winter fuel cuts?
Yes. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I made clear in my earlier answer that as the economy improves, we want to take measures that will impact on people's lives, and therefore we will look at the threshold, but that will have to be part of a fiscal event. But, Mr. Speaker, they lost control of every element of the economy, of prisons, the borders, the NHS, you name it. And now she's lost control of her party. They are sliding into oblivion. They will have to trade on their past, Mr. Speaker, because that's all they've got.
Speaker, I made it really easy for the Prime Minister. Just a simple question, yes or no. And he could not answer. I wonder how the public feel about a man who can't give a straight answer to a simple question. And you look at all of them behind him, all of them cheering, when this inevitable U-turn on winter fuel comes, and it will, from a desperate Prime Minister, what will he say to the 348 MPs who went over the top and voted for the winter fuel cut last September? Just like the British public, how can any of them ever trust him again?
Mr. Speaker, it's only because of the measures we've taken that the economy is improving. Growth at the highest rate since in the G7. 4 interest rate cuts, 3 trade deals because countries want to trade with this country because of the decisions that we've made. All of those decisions opposed by the party opposite. They've learned absolutely nothing and they're going absolutely nowhere.
Mr. Speaker, this is a Prime Minister who says he's taking measures. The jobs tax is killing jobs. Inflation is up. Business confidence is down. Everyone is worried. He promised to cut bills, but today we see they are rising because of his policies. He promised not to raise taxes on working people, but his jobs tax means people are losing their jobs. Every week we come here with a new company that is saying they are shedding jobs. That's on his watch. He promised to protect pensioners, but his winter fuel cut has driven thousands into hardship. His MPs hate this. He can't see them, but they all look sick just hearing what it is he's going to do. So let's wait until... Oh, yes, they're laughing. They're laughing. They're laughing.
I expect better from whips. And boys on at the back, I've got my eye on you. Kenny Bennett.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. Sorry. Which one wants to leave first? If I hear it, there we are. They've got the first volunteer. Are you going to behave? Can we behave?
Mr. Speaker, they are laughing just as they laughed at the budget. Hands up who here wanted winter fuel cuts. Hands up. Not a single one of them. Not a single one of them. The fact of the matter is, this Prime Minister is destroying them. They need to look at what they are doing to the country. The truth is, we all know that it's this Prime Minister, this Labour government, and their policies that are shafting the country, isn't it?
Yeah. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, they look in pretty good form. To me, and there's lots of them. Mr. Speaker, she talks about business confidence. Yesterday I didn't have time to read out the list of all the businesses that have come out in support of our EU deal. Mr. Speaker, I don't have time today. It's a long list. I went immediately to Lidl and spoke to the staff in Lidl. They're delighted with the deal we put forward yesterday. Business like the work we're doing. It's giving them confidence in the EU deal. She's opposed to each and every measure.
Louise Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Barrow Hill Primary School in my constituency of North East Derbyshire, a school in receipt of a new free breakfast club. The team there are doing a fantastic job, but challenges still remain. What more can we do as a government to support both them and local parents to give the children of Barrow Hill the start in life that they deserve?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and we are united by a shared focus on creating better life chances for our children. And I'm delighted to hear her constituents are already benefiting. Thanks to our plan for change, we'll deliver free breakfast clubs in every primary school in England. And I'm determined to support parents to give every child the best start in life. And that's why we're rolling out free childcare, expanding the first 300 school-based nurseries, and delivering more family hubs.
Shrubsole David, the leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the terrible fire in Bicester last Thursday? I know from my honourable friend, the member for Bicester and Woodstock, how deeply the close-knit community there has been affected by this tragedy. And firefighters Martin Sadler and Jenny Logan were true heroes, as was Dave Chester. And I hope the full prayers and thoughts of the House are with their loved ones and with the two firefighters still in hospital. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly said that his new trade deals will give a much-needed boost to economic growth and thus to the public finances. So will the Prime Minister make sure that struggling families and pensioners see the benefits of the growth? He teased the House with his first answer to his honourable friend, the member for Luton North. So will he commit now to reversing his cuts to the winter fuel payment in full?
Mr. Speaker, firstly, can I just thank him for his comments about the Bicester tragedy. It's very important that in a moment like this the House does come together. And we are taking measures, obviously, to help with the cost of living crisis, and that's why the EU deal yesterday was so important, because the impact it will have on prices, particularly in supermarkets, directly affecting those who are affected by the cost of living crisis. Mr. Speaker, what I said before was this, that the economy is beginning to improve. People are still feeling the pressure. That's why we're taking the measures that we are. That's why we're striking the trade deals that we are striking. As that improves, I do want people to feel the benefit of the measures that we are taking. And that is why I want to ensure that more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel. It is important that, as you'd expect, that we are clear we can afford the decisions we're making, and that's why it will now be looked at a fiscal event.
Shrubsole David.
Mr. Speaker, I think I welcome what the Prime Minister has said, but we will look at the details, and I hope he will use some of these new proceeds to help others like carers, because the government's changes to PIP will have big consequences for family carers, like Ginny, who cares for her husband Tim, who has myotonic dystrophy. Ginny holds her husband's hand to keep him steady as he walks. He falls frequently and chokes on his food. Ginny is the sole earner in the family. She works part-time on top of caring for Tim. But she's calculated that under the government's cuts, her family will lose £12,000 £1,000 a year. So can the Prime Minister tell Ginny and many family carers like her, what does he expect them to do?
Mr. Speaker, we have approached this on the basis of the principles that we must support those who need support. On the question of getting people into work, that we should support people into work where they can work, and of course, where they can work, they should. But it is undeniably the case that the current arrangements don't work and need to be reformed. And that's why we're bringing forward reform, necessary reform, to ensure the system works better.
Annalise Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday in this place, I read the victim...
16 minutes after 12 is the time. Natasha, Clark and I will pick over the bones of what we have just heard after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. I lost it. I think he was called Nick. He got it absolutely right. He called it perfectly on both inflation and the jobs tax. And then I did what I've started doing recently since Keith showed me how to do it. I clicked on the button that lets me see people's past messages to the programme. And he's a bit of a genius. He did extremely well. So well done you, whatever your name is. I think it might have been Nick. 12:19 is the time. She does this a lot. Shall I just do my customary run through of text before we crack on? We'll start with Steph, who's up north. She writes, "Oh my, listening to Badenoch reminds me of when I was a trainee solicitor getting sent off to deal with a case in my blue suit and eagerly pressed white blouse. Naive, lacking in credibility and just sounding plain stupid. Amazing to think that I could have been leader of the Tory party." Chris writes, "She's all over the shop today, but happily adds, loved the show so far." Kemi Badenoch looks like the stooge feeding lines to the star of the show. I hope she stays, but I seriously doubt it. John says, "I thought Kemi Badenoch did better than usual to begin with, and then fell on the front foot. No, she fell on the front foot and then ran out of steam." That's from John in Liverpool. He gave a comprehensive answer and she said he hasn't answered the question. She is awful, says Darren. That's often a good criticism of Keir Starmer, but it wasn't on this occasion. He did give a fairly comprehensive answer. Genuinely, writes James, and I mean this in all sincerity, what is wrong with her? And Agatha picks up on the use of the phrase stop whining. Does she think she speaks to some stroppy child? Conservatives mention the cost of living crisis, forgetting who brought it all honours. And then Alice picks up on her call for people to put their hands up and asks, WTF? Well, this is literally school-level stuff. One more, actually. There's loads today. I'm a floating voter, says Steve in Lancashire. I'd never consider voting Tory with Badenoch in charge. Just woeful at best. That's it.
I just thought I'd leave that hanging there.
Yeah, I like it. A little bit of tension.
I thought her performance was a little better this week. She'd obviously had a little bit of Weetabix. So had he. They both came at it from quite a strong point of view. They were both, really going at each other. But what she didn't do, which is what you do in Prime Minister's Questions when you are aware that the government are about to change policy on something, she rightly questioned him, are you going to U-turn on winter fuel and when's it going to happen? He then confirmed he was going to majorly change his position, the government's position on winter fuel, and she just ignored it, just let it go. That is when you really need to hammer someone at Prime Minister's Questions. You go back and say, and that is the Prime Minister, confirming what we all have been hearing for weeks, that the Prime Minister is looking at an embarrassing U-turn on his major policy. This is awful, and the Tories and the opposition have forced him into it. That is exactly how you create a win in the House of Commons. And it felt like she didn't really listen to his answer because, like you said, she just said, well, he's not really answered the question. Yes, he has. He said,
because both our ears,
all
four of our ears pricked up when he started talking about it. It would only happen as part of a fiscal event, which is politician for it's going to happen.
Exactly. And that was very, very strong from him, saying he's going to change the threshold. It is going to happen at a fiscal event. We will do it when we can find the money for it. This is a huge major change for Keir Starmer that he's just announced. And of course, he will get some flack for it. And there are, as Kemi Badenoch pointed out, 300 and so MPs that have voted for this winter fuel cut at an incredibly damaging cost to them and their constituencies. People's mailboxes and emails have been full of people talking about this issue for months. And now the government are announcing a partial, at least, U-turn on that. And she didn't even pick up on it.
We listened. We reflected, we realised
government is in listening mode.
That on this occasion we had perhaps elected the wrong recipient of our much needed fiscal strictness, and therefore we have decided to listen to the voters and return the winter fuel allowance. They can ride that out 4 years out from a general election.
Exactly, and I think they have realised the real strength of this. But yes, I thought that generally the sort of words that Keir Starmer and the government are now using on the economy is starting to change. They keep now saying, as the economy improves, we understand people are still feeling the pressure, but things are starting to look up. And you heard Rachel Reeves, when she was speaking earlier this week to LBC, use that exact argument.
It's quite a flex, isn't it? Well, we can abolish the winter. We can bring back the winter fuel allowance because everything's going so well.
Well, not that it's going so well, but it's going to get better,
yes,
and that's when we will find the money to do so. So it very much feels that the language from government has changed in the last couple of weeks. But equally, Kemi Badenoch able to sort of argue that this is all because of the Tories. She clearly didn't feel like that was something that she could do, potentially because the Tories have now fallen to fourth in the polls, according to one poll out this week, behind the Liberal Democrats. So she's not doing too well. I thought the topics were all right. Inflation, jobs tax, winter fuel, all quite good. I thought her delivery was quite good, but to miss that open goal, I didn't feel like there was...
and she does the thing that probably is going to typify her PMQs appearances for however long she stays in post, which is anything she picks on, he's got a very easy comeback. Inflation is 2%, you're wrong, or 2, what is it today? 3.5%? Yeah,
3.5%.
Inflation is, it was 11 under you.
Exactly.
Next question.
Next, carry on.
And, well, that was because of the Ukraine war, which the last time I checked hasn't finished.
Yeah.
So she's not very good at it.
No, and the hands up thing doesn't work. Which Labour MP is going to put their hands up and say, I'm very upset about this?
Unless she's got the guts to actually really string it, to say, come on, put your hands up, and literally awkward silence.
I didn't
wait
think
until the speaker. It didn't work. I'm just wondering. I would have quite liked to see whether or not all the loyalists would eventually have put their hands in the air. I don't know, but no, it was an incredible thing to do. But then, as my texts today reflect, quite a lot of what she does seems incredible, doesn't it?
But yes, I thought, that was a tricky moment for her. Don't think she really quite pulled that off.
How much danger is she in? That poll changes something.
It does, and I was actually speaking to some MPs earlier this week about this and sort of how long does she have. But actually, they think that things are still going to get worse for the Tories. They're going to lose a lot of seats in the Scottish elections next year and the Welsh elections.
So let someone else carry the count.
There's no point getting rid of yet, because it's just going to get worse.
She's going to start looking like Rishi Sunak soon, isn't she? She can't wait to reach the finish line.
Exactly, but she's not there yet.
Why do we never see Robert Jenrick at PMQs? One
is he not? Because he's not there.
Front bench, or would you not expect him to be showing solidarity?
You absolutely would, and you saw Keir Starmer sitting next to today, Angela Rayner, and a show of support after that story that we've seen, which Kemi Badenoch rightly seized on, and I think it was sort of good to do. And we're watching images now of Yvette Cooper on there on the front bench. Can't see that Robert Jenrick is here. Doesn't mean that he's not there or that he's not been there. He should be, but potentially that's his choice of trying to distance himself from the current regime.
A little bit of Ed.
Yes, Ed Davey going on trade deals, but also, calling on the government to go even further in their winter fuel allowance U-turn, saying, actually, would you now just scrap the whole thing? This is just not good enough. But yes, Ed Davey, I was surprised he didn't go on Isreal and Gaza. I thought that might be something that he would push a little bit further on today.
Well,
but
I think you
that
probably nailed that at the beginning, didn't you? Some people may think they've arrived at this position somewhat belatedly, but there's not going to be much dispute from the Liberal Democrats about anything that David Lammy has said this week.
Absolutely not.
But Keir Starmer said he thought Badenoch might have gone in on it a bit.
I thought that Ed Davey would have said, I want the government to now go further, to do more. And I think there are lots and lots of Labour backbenchers that also agree. And you saw there was somebody that asked David Lammy yesterday, how do you sleep at night, to his face? And he was not best pleased with that. So I thought that might be where they would go. But am
I being cynical, asks Ben, when I think that the hands up is going to be part of a social media video clip?
Sorry, what was the question she said again? She said, "Put your hands up if you
voted for the winter." No, if you like it.
If you like it,
or you support it.
Right. Okay. It doesn't. I don't think it's going to work. Maybe, but because the Tories are.
Ben's perhaps doing himself a bit of a favour when he uses the word cynical. Maybe he's just being silly.
Maybe. I mean, the Tories on social media try their very best, don't they?
Speaking of silly, something happened last week. I don't know if you remember it, but I think we reacted to it quite differently.
This Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish.
Now, I've got to tell you something I haven't told you off air. I got some jip online, or even on Blue Sky, which is generally a very nice place, for not calling that out. So a couple of, only 2-3 people were like, God, I can't believe you didn't call that out.
As in calling it out for
being wrong
a bit...
and being out of order. And I actually had done. I did call it out. And I nearly wrote on Blue Sky, I did think it was out of order, but my female colleagues talked me out of it, because Eleanor was nodding away on the other side of the glass that that's absolutely fine.
Maybe
You were
I'm really mean.
But you were very much of the view that that was part of the normal cut and thrust of politics. But it did actually make me quite uncomfortable. But I think I probably made the right decision not to throw you and Eleanor under a
That's
bus.
so kind, thank you.
Because I think Keir Starmer realised well, I know he did, because he said this yesterday.
The Prime Minister once argued, and we quote, we should retain the benefits of the single market. Given his recent tendency to dismiss the views of others, what would he say to his younger self?
Mr. Speaker, I think last week I was overly rude, and I apologise. I do respect the honourable member. She raises a serious point. We're now outside of the EU. We had red lines in our manifesto on the single market. We've kept those red lines and delivered a very good deal with it.
Can you remember Boris Johnson ever apologising for being rude?
No, he never would do. Maybe I'm slightly desensitised to the rudeness of politicians in the House of Commons, but I do agree with you that is uncharacteristically rude for Keir Starmer to say something like that.
We did talk during PMQs about how rarely, if ever, Badenoch actually gets under his skin. You never see a frustration or an irritation that we've come to.
She's not got there yet.
No, but that obviously did, because that is why he misspoke and subsequently apologised. Speaking of misspeaking, it's a shame we don't hear more from 30p Lee. I presume he's not allowed to talk, given that he is now in Farage's party. And what party was he in before? The Tories.
The Tories.
He was, and then Labour before that.
You know what he was? No, he was a Labour councillor first, then the Tories,
right,
and then
and now Reform. I wonder where he'll go next. Possibly Ben Habib's new outfit. Have we
That's
had
true.
any word on that yet?
No, I haven't
Okay,
had that.
So Keir Starmer helping out with the multiple choice round in the Commons a few moments ago.
The hands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, keeps telling his gullible backbenchers, those over there, that he's deported 24,000 people from this country since he came into power. But he won't say who these people are. Now, it's my guess that they are people that came on work visas, students, and they are simply overstayers. But I'm willing, Mr. Speaker, to be proved wrong if you can answer one simple question. How many of these people that he's deported are failed asylum seekers that's come on small boats or on the back of lorries? Answer the question.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that we've removed over 24,000 people. That's the highest record for nearly 10 years. We're taking other measures to get back control of our borders, including the Borders Bill, which gives our law enforcement enhanced powers, including terrorism-like powers. What did his party do? What did he do? He voted against them. And I'll tell you why he voted against them. Because they don't want to fix this problem. Because it benefits them. It benefits them not to fix it. Party before country. It's very good he's standing in for the member for Clacton, I have to say. There was no sign of him yesterday at the EU state. He was the first through the E-gates somewhere to south of France. Nice work if you can get it.
First joke was better than the second one.
Yeah.
So he is in Nice with his trotters up.
Is he? I just asked somebody about half an hour ago, so where is he? Where is he? There is a rumour that he is in the south of France, but I
When
can't
is
confirm
recess?
it.
When is Parliament in recess?
I think it's meant to be in recess on Friday, so it does beg the question, why did he not just go away next week?
Or shall I take a punt on that?
Oh.
I suspect he's got some lucrative work lined up in the United States of America or something like that, and so he considered he'd squeeze his holiday in now. Yeah, no, so he'll squeeze his holiday in now while he's supposed to be serving the people of Clacton in the House of Commons, and then when he's actually on holiday, for which he still receives his salary, of course, as he will do this week, he can go off and do, because it's easier to claim that I need a holiday than it is to claim that I need to be in America cozying up to the kind of people who don't know what habeas corpus is. I don't know. I could be wrong. It's just nice to think out loud.
We should petition MPs for a new law to ban them from going on holiday in non-parliamentary recess time.
I'd be up for that. Certainly ban them from doing I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. It's 12:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. On the subject of Reform UK, or whatever they're called, there is a story that deserves a wider audience, and that is the pledge by the chairman, a man called Zia Yusuf, that there would be a large-scale reversal of all so-called low-traffic neighbourhoods in the council areas that they took control of earlier this month. That's the Reform UK chair, Zia Yusuf, demonstrating, a very impressive grasp of both policy and practicality when he pledged that they would remove all low-traffic neighbourhoods in the council areas that they took control of. What would be the most embarrassing thing to emerge? This is a man who's supposed to be helping to make the party look more serious. What's the single most embarrassing thing that could emerge if someone promised to remove all low-traffic neighbourhoods from 10 councils that they now control? Just have a little think about that for me. And if you think hard enough, you'll almost certainly be right. Here is Amelia Cox with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Chris is good at this. I might enlist Chris to write some of the alleged jokes that we try to do on the programme. Chris says, in response to the question I just asked you about Zia Yusuf, the chair of Reform UK, Chris wrote, "See Andrea Jenkins and DEI officers." Now, how much attention have you been paying to the news lately? Have you paid enough attention to the news to understand why that is both rather witty and rather pertinent? So Andrea Jenkins, you remember her. She's the one that used to gesture in obscenities towards the ordinary voting public. She promised when she became mayor recently to abolish all the DEI officers in the area that she'd become mayor of. And it turned out there weren't any, which is a bit of a clue to what's happened to Zia Yusuf's pledge to get rid of all the low traffic neighbourhoods in the areas where Reform have taken control of councils. But I'm not going to tell you any more about that because it's time to welcome Simon Spurrell back to the programme. It's been a while, Simon, but Simon was one of the very first people to provide us with a proper insight into precisely what impact upon business, British business, Boris Johnson and David Frost's Brexit deal would have. Those men currently competing to castigate the improvements that Keir Starmer has secured. But it was, for me, indicative of two things. Number one is that the Brexit debate had become so bent by the time stories like Simon's reached the airwaves that they didn't actually receive anything like the attention that they would have received if people in my profession weren't so desperately sucking up to Boris Johnson and pretending that he'd actually secured a good deal. And number two, business always finds a way. It's like water. And that dependency upon the entrepreneurial flair of people perhaps camouflaged some of the damage that was done. So he's back. The last comment, I'm going to check my memory now, Simon. Nice to see you. What a lovely backdrop you've got there. What?
And taking advantage of the good weather.
I don't blame you. Much nicer than mine. I have to look at Keith. The business, the Cheshire Cheese Company, I remember this really well, actually. You sustained pretty huge losses. You were looking at the possibility of opening a kind of hub, a distribution hub in continental Europe so that you could no longer be subject to the checks on each individual truckle or each individual pallet of cheese that would be going in. I think the figure we put on how much you think you lost was about 600 grand, and in the end you sold it.
Yes, that's correct. I did indeed. So it's a bigger organisation that already had that hub in place so that they could actually, they had the economy of scale. And the thing was that the associated overheads and costs were exactly the same for a pallet as they were a container, which is 26 pallets. So absorption of the overheads from veterinary check, the health certificate, the increased cost of transport because it took a lot longer to get from A to B, are absorbed and diluted by, in effect, 26. We were sending like pallets over, not containers. So I'm very happy to say that the Cheshire Cheese Company has flourished under the Joseph Healer management and ownership now, and they've managed to continue expansion into America and into Asia, which was always going to be the dream for me. But I didn't have the resources or the finance to do that at the time.
A little bittersweet that someone else is in the driving seat while this success is secured, or not?
No, I'm happy that the people working there, had a future, yes. And obviously I obviously made a bit of money out of the sale as well, actually, which is. Is a nice thing to do after putting sort of 15 years into it there to get something back. And, I'm now helping another business I was involved at the time, the Hartington Creamery, a artisan Stilton maker up in Derbyshire, who face exactly the same problems that the Cheshire Cheese Company faced, albeit they are a smaller organisation.
Scale. So, I mean, the $64,000 question is, what did you think of yesterday's announcement?
I thought it was a step forward. It was a bit late in terms of, and that's not Keir Starmer or the Labour Party's fault. This is 100% the fault of the previous government. And what really shocks me is that the media hasn't really picked up that the 30 billion loss each year in food export, the deficit, has been created by one single selfish act by Boris Johnson in 2020, in October. October 2020, he thought that Trump was going to get a second term, and he thought he was going to get this mega deal from the US, and therefore they could proverbially stick two fingers up at the EU and have a hard Brexit, which was the ultimate dream for them there. And so therefore, despite the knockback from the Lords twice on amendment, he used his whipping majority to force an amendment to write into the agriculture bill that said that Britain could lower its food standards to accommodate a deal that was beneficial to the UK. So in other words, the Trump deal there. So up until that point, we were going to guarantee, and Theresa May had actually expected that, everybody expected, we were going to align our food standards. We would be dynamically aligned. So that would mean that there'd be no checks, no health certificates, no vets involved, no stop checks at the borders, and no increased costs for the UK. And that single act meant that the EU had to say, well, if you're not guaranteeing alignment, we're going to treat you as a third country. And we then got hit with the massive amount of overheads and costs and bureaucracy that were created from that single one act. Of course, Trump didn't get in, so it was all for nothing. And they wouldn't renegotiate. I spoke to EU commissioners and they said, we've left the door open constantly to the Johnson government to actually come back to us and tell us what they want to change, what isn't working for them. There was nothing. Then the real smarter for me really is the one that really makes it a sting, is that it's taken until April last year, 2024, for the UK to reciprocate the terms of the agreement. So the EU producers have had an open doorway into Britain since January 2021. British producers, from that 1st of Jan, had all the extra and quite unexpected volume of bureaucracy, paperwork and costs. So there's been no level playing field. Now, no surprise to me, 14 months in, the EU decides that maybe actually this is a good time to renegotiate, because I think their small producers have been chewing the ear actually of each particular country, saying this is ridiculous. We can't go on like this. So there's been a bit of a rethink, I think.
And those governments, various governments in Europe, have listened to the small producers in ways that nobody listened to producers like you. I'm quite good at this, Simon. I generally have information filed away somewhere in my head that would bore the hind legs off a donkey when it comes to the various wrinkles and wriggles of Brexit negotiations. But I'd actually forgotten about the Swiss deal being on the table for Frost and Johnson and them deciding not to go along with it. So that would have avoided, you'd probably still own the Cheshire Cheese Company if they'd accepted that, unless a better offer had come in. But how many companies have gone under? How many other people have just seen a massive decrease in income, and for all the opposite reasons that we were sold, because red tape increased, because doing business became more expensive, because the European Union actually, as you've described it, was handed a gold-plated advantage over British producers and British consumers.
Yeah. I think it beggars all belief that there is opposition to this part of that particular reset, the dynamic alignment. Why would you be against small businesses being able to, once again, to commercially operate back in the EU. And why would you be against the end user, the consumer in the supermarkets, paying less for goods? Because, of course, the prices have gone up dramatically because the EU have to then, the suppliers have been putting their prices up to accommodate the extra bureaucracy and the stops and the transport.
Well, this is the rhetoric of rule taking, isn't it? This is the politicians standing up and saying, we have to take rules, we have to follow rules, without really being able to explain, A, what that means, and B, why that would be a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is, Britain has the highest food standards in the world anyway. So we're not actually doing anything differently other than I mean, the thing is that the EU adopted our food standards back in sort of the early 2000s. So they adopted ours, and now we're thinking it's terrible that we're going to actually align the standards we set with our largest trade partner, who are literally a few minutes away compared to the ones we're dealing with all over the world.
A spectre there of chlorinated chicken and hormone-injected beef and all the rest of it, but that those ships happily seem to have sailed as a consequence of both of the arrangements, deals, call them what you will, that Keir Starmer has secured with the United States and latterly the European Union. So cautious optimism, mate. I remember why I enjoy talking to you so much. You don't just know your cheese, do you? You can't be in the kind of business you're in without really understanding import-export regulations, friction, red tape, ease of passage, all of it, carnets, all the whole shebang.
Yeah, you've got. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to be grown up about this, which is sadly lacking in a lot of politicians, and that is to actually then look at the wider picture, look at this as a more of an entrepreneurial way, actually, and think, what is a cause and effect of anything that we do, and Britain has been previously completely lacking in that. It's just been rhetoric, it's been sound bites, it's been flag waving, and absolutely nothing being done. That's the thing. The job here is to actually not just talk about it, but get things done. And for that, I think Starmer's making the right decisions here. Yes, you have to give and take, but that's the art of the deal. I'll steal that from the person who doesn't know anything about art of the deal. It is you give a little to win a little. That's it. And that will always be the case with any deal. And keep on doing it. All we have to hope now is that something happens, and it happens quite quially.
Yes, speed is of the essence. Speed is of the essence.
Yeah. I think the only thing that I really hope that is included in this is the original reason that I ended up all over the media back in 2021 is that I identified that there was no exemption for consumers. So still at the moment, if you take a cheese sandwich to the EU, you'll get arrested at the border or fined or taken off you one of the three. Bizarrely, again, the UK hasn't reciprocated that arrangement until about 3 weeks ago, when they've put a ban on anybody bringing foodstuffs in from the EU, but purely because there's a foot and mouth outbreak over in the EU. So they haven't actually even sort of mirrored that one. So EU food producers have been able to sell via e-commerce websites foodstuffs to the UK, but since 2021, which was my original beef, because we were big on that, we weren't allowed to actually send anything at all to the EU. And I hope that has been lifted or negotiated as part of the lift, because an exemption for consumers is a sensible thing. And, we're ideally suited in Britain to actually be a hub for distribution of e-commerce. So let's hope that's included.
Well, and we'll both keep an eye on that and alert the other when we come to any conclusions, because of course somebody listening in Bruges or in Berlin may want to order a delicious wheel of Stilton from the Hartington Creamery in Derbyshire, Simon, and at the moment it'd be rather hard to get it to them.
It would, very, very difficult indeed. I mean, the Hartington is actually selling via a single distributor.
Yes.
I'm going to name them, called Frome, because they've been exceptionally helpful to us. They've been a saviour, really, to get small producers' cheese over into Europe.
But previously, you'd have boxed it up and sent it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's quite expensive to do so. For us to export, them to import, there is a cost that we hope can be removed. And when that's removed, again, it opens up loads and loads of opportunities, not just for us, but for lots of small producers. It gives more variation, more options on either side.
Top man, Simon, always a pleasure, and I'm delighted that you finally had a little bit of good news. But I did say, I think last time we spoke, that entrepreneurs like you will find ways to do business, even as politicians like Boris Johnson and David Frost and the rest of them put up obstacles that they claim are actually to be welcomed and to be desired. Jonathan is delighted with that interview. Finally, he writes, it is said the rules we didn't want to take were the rules we made, whilst being fully ready to take the rules that were going to be imposed upon us from the United States. More good news for those of us who have an affinity with the countryside, and of course most small producers of food and cheese will be in the countryside or thereabouts, coming up after this, because the Supreme Court has been hearing an attempt by a rather wealthy landowner to ban plebs like you and me from camping on Dartmoor. We'll find out what's happened there after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:52 is the time. Until I met my next guest, I had not really given enough thought to the questions of who owns this country. Who owns England is the title of this. Yeah, that is the title of one of Guy Shrubsole's books. The other, of course, being The Lie of the Land, which is a pun. The lie of the... I knew all the statistics that are sometimes bandied around a little bit casually, but in terms of the role that landowner can play in the country, few stories have brought it home harder than the tale of attempts to ban camping on Dartmoor. Guy is here to tell us about the latest and possibly final development in this curious case. Who are Alexander and Diana Darwell, Guy?
Yes, well, hello, James. And Alexander and Diana Darwell are two very wealthy landowners who own about 4,000 acres of Dartmoor. And over the last 2.5 to 3 years, they have been bringing a legal case to try and extinguish the right to wild camp on Dartmoor. And Dartmoor is the last place in England and Wales where there has been an actual legal right to wild camp. You can go to Scotland and wild camp, you can't do it anywhere else in England or Wales legally apart from Dartmoor. So it's been pretty extraordinary and outrageous that these...
It's been slowly chiselled away, hasn't it?
This right has been slowly chiselled away. And the Darwells won their case initially at the High Court. There were huge protests. Thousands of people turned out on mass trespasses. And then it was overturned. But they've decided to take it all the way to the Supreme Court. And we finally this morning... at the Supreme Court in Westminster, heard the verdict, which was that the Supreme Court has unanimously upheld the right to wild camp on Dartmoor, which is obviously a great relief and, cause for great celebration.
And I'm intrigued, and this, obviously we can't know the workings of the minds of the Darwells, but in general terms, would a landowner's motivation in a case like this be to channel people towards campsites where they have to pay, or would it be to just keep plebs off their land? Or what do you reckon?
We can only go by what the Darwells said in some of the evidence they gave in the various court cases they brought. And, they used phrases like that we are custodians of the countryside, which, I had to look at and go, not sure that's quite accurate or true when you also run a very large pheasant shoot on your 4,000-acre estate, causing potentially damage to nature reserves, and the idea potentially, of course, potentially. But the idea that that wild campers, that many thousands and hundreds of thousands of people have wild camped on Dartmoor down through the decades. It's the place that we hold 10 tours each year where young people get to go out and learn the art of navigation and experience the elements and experience the magic and wonder of camping under the stars. The idea that this is causing somehow untold damage to the landscape when we're throwing intensive agriculture and shooting and forestry at it is really for the birds.
And it speaks to something deeper than that, doesn't it? Something that I know is very close to your heart and is perhaps not that well understood by the average Brit, which is the sort of history of land ownership itself and land access, and people with immense wealth and power essentially expelling people from land, taking away livelihoods.
Absolutely. The whole history of enclosure, the enclosure of the commons, how landowners basically stole land off the rest of us in doing so and forced us out, forced people out of the landscape. and to now have the temerity to say, well, you townies can't come into the countryside, otherwise you might mess it up. But I think this is also this is an ongoing story about the public trying to push for greater rights of access again. We do have a partial right to roam in England. We have the Countryside and Rights of Way Act that was brought in the year 2000, but that has only given us a right of access to 8% of this country, 8%, in places really, really remote from where most people live. And I feel really lucky to live in Devon, close to Dartmoor National Park, one of those few places where we have those rights. And that the only place, as I say, in England and Wales where we have the right to wild camp. But it's really not enough, is it? In the 21st century, we really, really ought to be allowed to feel welcome in our own countryside. And that's why we're calling for more from the government, for a new right to roam act.
I think that's what appeals to me most about these stories and about much of your work, is that it's a challenge to the know your place culture, isn't it? It's a challenge to the pigeonholing and the social hierarchy. And of course I can sleep under the stars on Dartmoor if I want to, because I'm a free-born Englishman, to use a phrase I'm not sure I've ever used before.
And it should be a right for anyone who lives in this country, anyone who visits this country. And I think that this is something that we really, really want to see. I mean, part of the Right to Roam campaign, part of the Stars Are For Everyone group that has been set up to really challenge and champion wild camping on Dartmoor and across the country. And we really, really need now the government to pay attention to this, to see the huge amounts of public interest there's been around this case, to know the fact that the polling shows that nearly 70% of the population supports a right of responsible access in England, as has existed in Scotland for the last 20 years. And they need to change the law. They need to actually change the law so that we can all do that and all enjoy it across our countryside.
The Dartmoor National Park Association said it was delighted and relieved by the ruling. Of course, getting wider media coverage in pursuit of getting higher public interest and engagement might be rendered a little bit tricky by the identity of some of the other owners of enormous swathes of land in this country. I remember when I was digging into Paul Dacre for my last book, I discovered that he was not only in possession of some fairly large estates, but also in receipt of European Union funding for some of them. So some of this won't be appearing in the Daily Mail in a favourable way anytime soon, which is why you're always welcome here, Guy Shrubsole.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you want to read more of Guy's work, The Lie of the Land and Who Owns England are the books, and Right to Roam is the organisation where he does much of his campaigning. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player and the LBC app, currently the most downloaded news app in the land. Did you know that, Sheila Fogarty?
I did not.
More people downloading the LBC app than any other
in
news
the land.
App in the
that was
land.
Very dramatic.
In all the
land.
lands.
In the land.
In
all
lands,
the land.
In these islands. Well, Guy's here. I'm trying to deploy the kind of language that he appreciates. Don't forget, you can stay up to date on the top stories and opinions. You can put your news into the categories that you want, and you can pause and rewind live radio as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free, the official LBC app from your app store now. Tom Sawbrick with you at 4, but now it is time for, on LBC, Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.